This man got told he had no power and responded by dropping Conqueror's Haki on everyone's ass. Fast forward, and he's carving through Nomus, protecting his crew like a pirate captain, and sending all for one straight to hell. He is the pinnacle of the will of D, and the most insane grin in anime. Izuku ate the whole verse.
Welcome, legends, to Chronos Recom. I wrote this story myself, so if you have any suggestions or what-ifs you want to see, drop it in the comments below. Also, just wanted to let you know I've got a Patreon set up now for anyone who wants to support the channel directly. You can get early access to stories, submit direct fan requests, and get exclusive content. It's totally optional, but if you want to help keep these stories coming, check it out. Links in the description. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that bell so you never miss an upload. Let's dive into this story.
Izuku Midoriya sat in a plastic chair with her 4-year-old son on her lap, waiting for results that would define the rest of his life. The X-ray on the light box showed it plain as day. 2 joints in the pinky toe. Quirkless. The doctor delivered the news the way you'd read a grocery list, already turning to his next file, already done with this family. Inko's eyes filled with tears. Her hand tightened on Izuku's small shoulder, and Izuku Midoriya threw his head back and laughed. It was the kind of laugh that had no business coming from a 4-year-old. It was deep and wild and loud enough to rattle the anatomical poster on the wall. It was the laugh of a man who once stood on an execution platform with blades at his throat and smiled at 100,000 people because he knew that his death was only the beginning. Inko stared at her son. The doctor stared at her son. Izuku just kept laughing, tears of pure joy streaming down his round little face, because somewhere in the ocean of his soul, a voice as old as the sea itself whispered, "You were born free. You will die free. And everything between belongs to you." He didn't understand it yet. He was 4. But the feeling was everything. The world had just told him he was powerless, and every fiber of his being screamed back that this was the funniest joke he'd ever heard. "Mom," Izuku said, still grinning so wide his baby teeth showed, "I'm gonna be the greatest hero who ever lived." Inko burst into tears for a completely different reason. 3 weeks later, at the neighborhood playground, a boy named Katsuki Bakugo cornered a kid half his size against the fence. Bakugo was already popping firecrackers from his palms, already drunk on the praise of adults telling him his quirk made him special. The smaller kid, some round-faced boy with a tail, quirk he barely knew how to use, was crying, snot running down his chin, arms curled over his head. "You're so weak it's pathetic," Bakugo said, and sparks danced across his knuckles. "People like you should just give up." Izuku stepped between them. He was shorter than Bakugo, skinnier. He had a mop of green curls and freckles and absolutely zero reason to be confident. But the grin on his face said otherwise. It said he'd been waiting for this moment his entire short life. "Move," Bakugo snarled. "You're quirkless, Midoriya. You're even more pathetic than this guy." "You think so?" Izuku tilted his head. His grin widened. Bakugo raised his palm. An explosion cracked the air, bright, hot, aimed straight at Izuku's chest. And Izuku stood there with his arms at his sides and stared directly into it, his green eyes catching the firelight like something ancient and terrifying lived behind them. Then the air changed. It came from nowhere and everywhere. An invisible pressure, heavier than gravity, heavier than anything a child should be able to produce. It slammed down on the playground like a tidal wave made of pure will. The smaller kid behind Izuku stumbled, dizzy but still standing. The other playground kids staggered and clutched their heads. Katsuki Bakugo dropped face first into the dirt. His eyes rolled white. Foam bubbled at the corners of his mouth. His body twitched once, twice, then went still. Around the playground, 3 other kids had already passed out cold. Izuku stood in the center of it all, barely breathing hard, grin still locked in place. He looked down at Bakugo's crumpled form the way you'd look at a speed bump. "I'll never show my back to an enemy," Izuku said, and even at 4 his voice carried the weight of a promise forged across lifetimes. "Because the people I care about are standing right behind me." The round-faced kid with the tail stopped crying and stared at Izuku with something close to worship. When the ambulance came for Bakugo 20 minutes later, perfectly fine, just unconscious, the EMTs couldn't explain why, Izuku was already walking home with his mother, humming a sea shanty he shouldn't have known. The years between 4 and 14 changed Izuku's body, but never changed his spirit. He grew tall. He trained relentlessly. Swordsmanship he taught himself from fragments of muscle memory that lived in his bones, physical conditioning that would make Olympic athletes weep, and the constant sharpening of that invisible power inside him. By 10, he could coat his fists in a black, metallic sheen that made steel bend under his knuckles. By 12, he could sense people through walls, feel their intent like ripples in water, and predict where an attack would land before it started. He never explained any of it. When kids asked, he just laughed and said he was built different. When teachers asked, he told them it was a manifestation of pure willpower. When Bakugo, who had woken up on that playground with zero memory of what happened and only a deep, gnawing unease every time Izuku smiled at him, demanded answers, Izuku just grinned and walked away. He was popular in the way a campfire is popular. People gathered around him without deciding to. He laughed loud, talked louder, picked fights with anyone who punched down, and had this magnetic certainty about him that made you feel like you were part of something bigger just by standing next to him. He called his friends the crew. He told anyone who'd listen that freedom was the most important thing a person could have. The teachers called him a troublemaker. His classmates called him insane. But everyone felt it when Izuku Midoriya walked into a room. And then came the day under the bridge. Izuku was 14, walking home from school, earbuds in, humming, when the sewer grate behind him exploded upward and a wall of putrid green sludge surged toward him like a living nightmare. The sludge villain, a small-time criminal running from All Might, wrapped around Izuku's body in an instant, flooding his nose and mouth, trying to suffocate him and steal his body. For exactly one heartbeat, Izuku felt the slime fill his lungs. Then he grinned. His hand punched through the sludge and closed around a steel pipe from a broken railing nearby. The moment his fingers tightened, the pipe turned pitch black. Armament Haki, hard as diamond, flowed across the metal until it gleamed like polished obsidian. Izuku ripped his arm forward and slashed. The pipe split the sludge villain clean in half. Both halves splattered against the tunnel walls, twitching, trying to reform. Izuku swung again and again. Each swing carried that black coating, each impact hitting the villain's core mass with a force that shouldn't have been possible from a middle schooler swinging a broken pipe. He was laughing. Full-bellied, roaring laughter that echoed through the underpass like cannon fire. "Come on," Izuku shouted, slamming the pipe down one final time. The Haki-coated strike compressed the villain's body into the concrete, and the sludge stopped moving. "That's all you've got? I've seen puddles scarier than you." When All Might came skidding around the corner 30 seconds later, ready to deliver a Texas smash, he found a 14-year-old boy standing over a defeated villain, holding a black-coated pipe like a sword, laughing so hard he had tears in his eyes. All Might stared. The number one hero, the symbol of peace, the man who had defeated All for One, stared at this child and felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt small. All Might cornered Izuku on a rooftop 20 minutes later, after scooping the villain into a bottle and chasing down the boy who'd beaten him to the punch. He stood in his muscle form, towering, golden, larger than life, and watched Izuku lean against the railing with his hands behind his head like he owned the skyline. "Young man," All Might said, his voice booming. "What you did back there was extraordinary. That power you used, it wasn't a quirk, was it?" "Nope." Izuku popped the P. "I'm quirkless." All Might's smile flickered. "Then how? Willpower." Izuku tapped his chest. "Pure, unbreakable will. I call it Haki. It's mine. I was born with it, and I've been sharpening it every single day since I was 4 years old." All Might stood there, processing, recalculating, staring at this kid who spoke with the confidence of a man who'd already conquered the world once and was just doing it again for fun. Then the number one hero deflated, steam hissing from his body, his muscle form collapsing until the skeleton of Toshinori Yagi stood in its place, coughing blood into his fist. Izuku raised an eyebrow but said nothing about the transformation. He'd already noticed the weakness in All Might's stance weeks ago, watching him on TV. Observation Haki saw everything. "I have a power," Toshinori said, wiping his mouth. "A power that can be passed from one person to another. One for all. The accumulated strength of 9 generations. I was going to give it to a worthy successor." He looked at Izuku with tired, serious eyes. "I think that successor should be you." Izuku stared at him for 3 full seconds, then he laughed. It rolled out of him like thunder, that same booming laugh from the doctor's office 10 years ago, the laugh of the Pirate King at his execution, the laugh that said the whole world was one beautiful joke and he was the only one who got the punchline. "Keep it," Izuku said, still grinning. "I appreciate it, old man. I really do, but I've already got my own power." He held up his fist and let the Armament Haki flow across his knuckles, that impossible glistening black coating that made even All Might's eyes widen. "I don't need someone else's strength. I've got my will. That's all I've ever needed." Toshinori blinked. In 30 years of carrying One for All, in 5 years of searching for a successor, nobody had ever turned him down. Nobody had ever laughed at the offer. "You're certain?" Toshinori managed. "Dead certain." Izuku lowered his fist and stared out over Musutafu with eyes that saw something beyond the skyline, an ocean that existed only in his memories, a red sun setting over the Grand Line. "I'm going to become the greatest hero this world has ever seen, and I'm going to do it on my own terms, with my own power, as my own man." He turned back to All Might and flashed that impossibly wide grin. That's what it means to be free. Toshinori felt his heart squeeze. For a single irrational moment, he could have sworn he saw the outline of a straw hat on this boy's shadow. In the 10 months before the UA entrance exam, Izuku did 2 things. First, he trained. He trained like a man possessed. Running, lifting, swinging, drilling his haki until he could coat his entire body in that black sheen without conscious thought. He pushed his observation haki until he could sense the emotional state of every person within a city block. He drove his Conqueror's haki deeper, learning to focus it like a blade instead of a bomb, targeting single individuals instead of flattening everyone in range. Second, he forged a sword. He spent 3 months' worth of saved allowance on quality steel. He watched blacksmithing videos until he could shape metal in his sleep. And in a rented workshop space that his mom found for him after he promised to be careful, which was a lie because he burned himself 19 times, he hammered a blade into existence. A cutlass. Single-edged, slightly curved, built for speed and power in equal measure. The crossguard was simple, the handle wrapped in dark green cord. It was 80 centimeters of perfectly balanced death. He named it Ace. When he held it for the first time, fully finished, gleaming in the fluorescent light of the workshop, something in his chest burned with a grief so old it predated his own birth. A son he'd never met in this life. A fire that was stolen too soon. "I'll carry your name with me," Izuku whispered to the empty workshop, "all the way to the top." Then he swung the blade once, coated it in Armament Haki, and split his workbench in half. Time to go to UA. The morning of the UA entrance exam, the sky was overcast and the crowd of applicants stretched in a long, nervous line from the front gates to the train station. Hundreds of teenagers, clutching admission tickets, sweating through their jackets, muttering about point values and robot weaknesses. Izuku walked through them like a king returning to his castle. He wore his school uniform with the collar popped, his green hair wilder than usual, an ace resting across his right shoulder like the world's most dangerous fashion accessory. He hadn't bothered to hide it. Why would he? A hero needed a weapon like a captain needed a flag. People moved out of his way. They didn't decide to. Their bodies just did it. That invisible pressure rolled off him in a constant low-level wave. Conqueror's haki at its most subtle, the kind that didn't knock people out, but made every survival instinct in the human brain scream to give this person space. A tall boy with glasses, Tenya Ida, Izuku would learn later, stopped mid-sentence in a lecture he was giving to another applicant and turned to watch Izuku pass. His mouth opened like he wanted to say something about weapons regulations, then closed again. Something in those green eyes told him arguing was pointless. A girl with brown hair and round cheeks, Ochako Uraraka, watched him go by and felt her heart do something complicated. He looked like trouble, He looked like the kind of person who'd punch a natural disaster ace and laugh about it. She found herself smiling without knowing why. Izuku felt her gaze through his Observation Haki. He glanced over, caught her eye, and winked. Uraraka turned tomato red and nearly tripped over her own feet. The auditorium was chaos. Present Mike screamed explanations about point values, 1, 2, and 3-pointers, plus a 0-pointer you were supposed to avoid. Izuku leaned back in his seat, Ace propped against his shoulder, and grinned at the ceiling while everyone else took frantic notes. When they released the examinees to their battle centers, Izuku ended up at Battle Center B. He stood at the starting line with his cutlass drawn, the blade resting easy in his right hand, and watched the massive gates loom above him. Hey, a guy next to him, spiky red hair, sharp teeth, would later be identified as Eijiro Kirishima, nudged Izuku's arm. Is that a real sword, man? Are we allowed to bring those? Izuku grinned. Nobody told me I couldn't. That's technically a dodge, and I respect it. Kirishima grinned back with all those shark teeth showing. Start! Present Mike's voice shattered the air from somewhere above. The gates swung open. Every other examinee surged forward in a stampede of teenage panic. Izuku planted his feet, breathed in, and moved. He was gone so fast, Kirishima felt wind on his face. Izuku hit the mock city like a cannonball with a grin. The first robot, a 2-pointer, 8 feet of steel and servos, came around a corner and raised its arm cannon. Izuku swung Ace in a horizontal arc, the blade coated in jet black Armament Haki, and cut through the robot's torso like it was made of wet cardboard. Both halves hit the ground before the machine even registered the impact, 2 more behind it. Izuku spun on his heel, dropped low, slashed twice in the time it took to blink. Metal screamed and fell. A 3-pointer on the rooftop opened fire. Izuku leaped straight up, 3 stories in a single bound, met the robot at eye level, and drove Ace through its center mass so hard the blade punched out the other side and buried itself in the roof. He yanked it free, kicked the sparking wreck off the building, and landed on the street below in a crouch. He was laughing. He was always laughing. 7, he shouted to himself, already sprinting. Come on, give me more! This is a party! The other examinees in Battle Center B quickly realized something was wrong. The robots were disappearing. Izuku was carving a path through the mock city so fast that anyone trying to keep up found nothing left to fight. Kirishima managed to harden his fists and punch through a 1-pointer, only to watch Izuku blur past him and dismember 4 3-pointers in a single spiraling slash that painted the asphalt with sparks and lubricant. That guy is insane! Someone shouted from 2 blocks away. In the observation room above the battle center, the UA faculty watched the monitors in dead silence. Is he? Midnight started, leaning forward. Is he using a sword? He's using a sword, Cementos confirmed, sounding like he needed to lie down. His application says he's quirkless, Snipe added, pulling up the file. Quirkless. 0 quirk factor detected. On screen, Izuku Midoriya cut a 3-pointer clean in half from 20 meters away. The flying slash, pure air pressure from a hockey-coated swing, crossed the gap in a heartbeat and bisected the robot with surgical prec with perfect accuracy. The boy on screen was grinning so wide it looked like his face might split open. Principal Nezu took a slow sip of tea. Interesting, said the mouse dog bear, and something sparkled behind his beady black eyes. Very, very interesting. 8 minutes into the exam, Izuku had amassed 77 villain points. He could feel through Observation Haki that most of the other examinees were clustered in the northern section of the city, fighting over scraps. He was considering hunting down more robots just for the fun of it when the ground shook, the 0-pointer. It rose from behind the buildings like a metal god. 100 feet of armored nightmare, treads the size of school buses crushing everything beneath it. The vibration of its movement knocked loose bricks from every building in a 3-block radius. Examinees screamed and ran. The smart ones, anyway. Ochako Uraraka was trapped. A chunk of concrete had fallen across her leg, pinning her to the asphalt. She struggled, slapping at the rubble with her quirk-active fingers, but the slab was too heavy and the angle was wrong, and the 0-pointer was closing in, its shadow swallowing her whole. She looked up at 100 feet of metal death and thought, this is it. Then she heard laughter. It was wild and loud and utterly out of place, like someone had cracked the best joke in the world at a funeral. She She craned her neck and saw him, the green-haired boy with the sword, standing on a half-destroyed rooftop 3 buildings away, staring up at the zero-pointer with a grin so wide and fearless it made her breath catch. "Now that's a party!" Izuku roared, and his voice carried across the entire battle center like a cannon shot. He raised Ace above his head. The blade went black, deeper than black, a void that swallowed the light around it. Then something else appeared. Crackling, arcing, splitting the air, black lightning, red sparks dancing through it like embers from a bonfire, Conqueror's Haki coding. The technique of kings, the same power that Gol D, Roger once used to clash with the strongest men in the world. Divine departure. Izuku swung. The flying slash that erupted from Ace's edge was visible to the naked eye, a crescent wave of compressed black and red energy, screaming through the air with the sound of a thunderclap. It crossed the distance between Izuku and the zero-pointer in less than a second. It hit. The zero-pointer split. From crown to base, a single clean line appeared down the center of the 100-foot robot. For one long, absurd moment, it held together. Then the halves separated. They fell in opposite directions, 2 50-foot slabs of metal and machinery crashing into the buildings on either side of the street, raising twin clouds of dust and debris that billowed outward like mushroom clouds. The shockwave blew the clouds back from the sky above the mock city. Literally. The overcast gray ripped apart in a widening circle, revealing blue sky and sunlight for the first time that morning. Every single person in Battle Center B stopped moving. Uraraka, still pinned, stared upward with her mouth hanging open and her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. In the observation room, 12 pro heroes sat in absolute silence. Midnight's pen slipped from her fingers and clattered on the floor. Cementos had stopped breathing. Even Nezu's teacup had paused halfway to his lips. All Might, standing in the back of the room in his skeleton form, pressed one hand against the wall to steady himself. That boy, he thought, and his palms were shaking. That power. That will. He really didn't need one for all. He didn't need anything from me. Down in the battle center, Izuku dropped from the rooftop. He landed next to Uraraka in an easy crouch, sheathed Ace on his back in one smooth motion, and reached down to grip the concrete slab pinning her leg. One hand, Haki-coated. He lifted it like it was styrofoam and tossed it aside. Then he offered his hand to Uraraka and grinned. "You okay?" She stared at him, at his hand, at the bisected zero-pointer smoking in the background, at the sunlight pouring through the hole he'd punched in the clouds. "You?" she whispered. "You just split a robot in half? Yeah, it was great." He wiggled his outstretched fingers. "Come on, can you stand?" She took his hand. Her quirk activated on reflex, making him weightless, but he barely noticed. He pulled her to her feet with zero effort and steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. "Thanks for saving me," Uraraka managed, her face red, her voice small. Izuku gave her a thumbs up with his free hand, and that grin, that stupid, impossible, sunlight-bright grin, hit her like a truck. "That's what crewmates are for," he said. "Crew, mates? You took this exam, right? That means you're going to UA. Same as me," he tapped his chest, "which means you're crew, and I always protect my crew." Ochako Uraraka stood in the rubble of a destroyed street with a boy she'd met 5 seconds ago, and she felt, for the first time in her life, like she'd found something she didn't know she was looking for. The exam buzzer sounded. Izuku Midoriya scored 77 villain points and 60 rescue points. First place. By a landslide so embarrassing, the faculty argued about whether to even publish the full rankings. 2 weeks later, the acceptance letter arrived. Izuku ripped it open at the kitchen table while his mom hovered behind him, wringing her hands. A hologram of All Might popped out, his muscle form golden and booming, welcoming him to UA Hero Course, Class 1A, highest score in the history of the exam. "The highest score?" Inko whispered. Izuku leaned back in his chair and laughed at the ceiling. "I told you, Mom. Greatest hero who ever lived," Inko cried. Izuku hugged her, still laughing, and told her he'd buy her a house by the ocean someday. She didn't know why he said ocean specifically, and neither did he, really. It just felt right. The first day at UA, Class 1A was a zoo. 20 students filed into the classroom. Tenya Ida was already there, sitting ramrod straight, polishing his glasses. Uraraka bounced in 3 minutes later and immediately spotted Izuku at the back of the room with his feet up on the desk and Ace leaning against his chair. She waved. He waved back. Kirishima came in, recognized the sword guy from the exam, and immediately walked over to fist bump him. Bakugo came in last. He stopped in the doorway. His eyes swept the room, landed on Izuku, and his entire body went rigid. Something primal and animal in his hindbrain, a memory his conscious mind had suppressed for 10 years, fired every alarm it had. Izuku looked up from his conversation with Kirishima and met Bakugo's eyes. Yo, Bakugo. Casual. Easy, like greeting an old acquaintance. Took you long enough. Bakugo said nothing. His hands trembled at his sides. He didn't know why. He hadn't known why in 10 years. He sat down at the opposite end of the room. What's his deal? Kirishima muttered. Old friend, Izuku said, grinning. He just doesn't know it yet. Their homeroom teacher turned out to be a man in a sleeping bag. Shota Aizawa rolled out of the yellow cocoon like a depressed caterpillar, announced that their first real test was a Quirk apprehension test on the field, and told them to change into their gym uniforms. The student who scores last, Aizawa said, his bloodshot eyes scanning the class, will be expelled. Half the class panicked. Bakugo smirked. Todoroki, the half-white, half-red-haired boy with the scar, stayed expressionless. Izuku yawned. Out on the field, Aizawa ran through the exercises. 50-meter dash, grip strength, standing long jump, repeated side steps, ball throw, sit-ups, seated toe touch, distance run. The class cycled through them, most performing impressively, a few struggling, Bakugo dominating with explosive power at every station. Then came Izuku's turn at the ball throw. Aizawa handed him the ball and watched him step into the circle. The underground hero's eyes narrowed behind his hair. He'd read this kid's file. Quirkless, highest entrance exam score in UA history, defeated a zero-pointer. With a sword, the contradiction burned in his mind. Midoriya, Aizawa said, whatever you did in the entrance exam, do it here. Izuku tossed the ball up and caught it. He rolled his shoulders. He grinned, and then Aizawa's eyes glowed red. The capture weapon around his neck whipped upward. His erasure quirk locked onto Izuku Midoriya and activated at full force, trying to shut down whatever impossible power this boy possessed. Nothing happened. Or rather, everything happened exactly as Izuku intended. Because Haki was will, it was life force. It was the manifestation of the human spirit. It was as much a quirk as breathing was a quirk. You couldn't erase what a person was. Izuku's arm coated in black. The Armament Haki flowed from shoulder to fingertips, smooth as lid metal, and he cocked his arm back with the ball in his hand. Aizawa's erasure was still active. His eyes were still glowing, and it did absolutely nothing. Izuku threw. The ball left his hand with a crack like a rifle shot. The air behind it distorted, compressed, and erupted outward in a cone of force. The ball rocketed into the sky. Up, up, up. A shrinking speck that broke the sound barrier so cleanly, the shockwave hit the ground a full second after the ball vanished from sight. Everyone grabbed their ears. Car alarms triggered 3 blocks away. Aizawa stared at the measurement device in his hand. His expression, for the first time in years, showed something beyond exhaustion. The screen read, That's... Ida pushed his glasses up with a shaking hand. That's the same reading Bakugo got. Bakugo got 705 meters, Aizawa said flatly. This says infinity. The ball exited the atmosphere. Dead silence. 20 teenagers stared at Izuku Midoriya, who stood in the throwing circle rolling his shoulder like he'd just tossed a frisbee to a dog. Man, I was aiming for the moon, Izuku said. Oh well. What the hell? Midoriya? Bakugo exploded. Literally. Sparks flying from his palms, teeth bared, he launched himself across the field straight at Izuku's back. Full power right hook, explosion already building, aimed at the back of Izuku's head. Izuku didn't turn around. He raised one finger. Bakugo's fist, all that rage, all those explosions, all that desperate need to be superior, slammed into a single Haki-coated index finger and stopped dead. The explosion detonated against that one black fingertip and dissipated like smoke in a hurricane. Bakugo's arm buckled. His eyes went wide. His whole body screamed at him to run, the same way it had on that playground a decade ago. Izuku turned his head just enough to look at Bakugo over his shoulder. His green eyes held an ancient, amused weight. His grin had an edge to it. You're 100 years too early to challenge a king, Bakugo. Then the Conqueror's Haki pulsed, targeted, focused. A lance of pure willpower driven directly into Bakugo's consciousness. Bakugo's legs buckled. He dropped to his knees, the explosion dying in his palm, his vision swimming. He gasped, struggled to stand, and found his body absolutely refusing to obey. The rest of Class 1A stood frozen. Uraraka had both hands over her mouth. Kirishima's jaw was on the ground. Ida looked like his brain was blue screening. Todoroki's eyes had narrowed to slits, and for the first time all morning, something other than apathy lived in his expression. Aizawa's capture weapon was already moving. He sent it flying toward Izuku in an attempt to restrain him. The fabric wrapped around Izuku's shoulders. Izuku let it. He released the Haki pressure on Bakugo and raised both hands in easy surrender, still grinning. Relax. Teach. He attacked me. I just reminded him of his manners. Aizawa pulled the capture weapon tight, dragging Izuku forward a step. His red eyes bored into the boy's green ones. You? Aizawa's voice was low, grating, the voice of a man who had just watched his worldview take a hit. What are you? Izuku's grin was pure sunshine and danger in equal measure. Just a guy with big dreams. Aizawa stared at him for 5 long seconds. Then he released the capture weapon, turned to the rest of the class, and announced that nobody was getting expelled today. His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. Bakugo stayed on his knees for another 30 seconds before Kirishima helped him up. He didn't look at Izuku for the rest of the day. Word travels fast in a school of heroes. By the end of the first week, every student in UA knew the name Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless kid who scored infinity, the one who brought a sword to a quirk school and somehow made it look right. The one whose presence made your skin prickle like the air before a lightning strike. His classmates fell into orbit around him without meaning to. Uraraka and Ida became his closest companions. Uraraka drawn to his warmth and fearlessness, Ida drawn to his conviction despite his unorthodox methods. Kirishima attached himself like a barnacle, declaring Izuku the manliest person he'd ever met. Even Momo Yaoyorozu found herself listening when Izuku talked, because he spoke about heroism like it was the grandest adventure imaginable rather than a career path. Izuku called them all crew. He said it casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world, but they could feel the weight behind it. When Izuku called you crew, he meant he'd die for you. He meant he'd tear down anyone who touched you. He meant you were his in a way that transcended friendship. It should have been possessive. It should have been unsettling. But from Izuku, it just felt like safety. Bakugo kept his distance. Something ancient and immovable had settled in the space between them. A hierarchy that Bakugo couldn't articulate but felt in his bones every time Izuku's eyes landed on him. It drove him insane. He trained harder, fought harder, screamed louder, and all the while, Izuku just smiled at him like he was waiting for Bakugo to figure something out. 2 weeks into the semester, the announcement came. A rescue training exercise at the unforeseen simulation joint. The class suited up, boarded a bus, and arrived at the massive dome facility to find the Space Hero 13 waiting for them with a prepared speech about the responsible use of quirks. Izuku walked in with Ace on his back and a grin on his face. He scanned the facility through Observation Haki, the flood zone, the landslide zone, the fire zone, the downpour zone, the mountain zone, and felt something stir. Danger. Real danger. Coming fast. Hey, he put a hand on Ida's shoulder. The class representative turned to him. Something's wrong. Ida blinked. What do you? The air at the center of the facility tore open. A black portal, rimmed with purple mist, expanded in the central plaza like a wound in reality. From it poured bodies, dozens, then hundreds. Villains, street-level thugs, mutant types, transformation types, emitter types, all flooding into USJ with weapons drawn and murder in their eyes. At the head of them stood a man covered in severed hands, scratching his neck with frantic energy. Beside him, the purple mist coalesced into a humanoid shape with yellow eyes. And behind them both, standing on the steps like a monument to nightmares, was a creature. Black skin, exposed brain, dead eyes, a beak-like mouth, muscles upon muscles upon muscles. The Nomu Aizawa's capture weapon was already flying. Stay back! 13, protect the students. The class erupted into panic. Shouts, screams, students grabbing each other and stumbling backward. Izuku drew Ace. The sound of the blade clearing its sheath cut through the chaos like a church bell at midnight. Every student in Class 1A turned to look at him. He stood at the front of the group, cutlass in hand, blade already running black with Armament Haki, and on his face was a smile so wide and so genuine and so utterly insane that Uraraka later described it as the face of someone who just got invited to the best party of their life. "Oh, hell yes," Izuku breathed, and his eyes sparkled with a light that belonged to another world. "That's a lot of enemies." "Midoriya, get back!" Ida grabbed his arm. Izuku looked at Ida, really looked at him, and something in those green eyes made Ida's grip loosen. "Ida." Izuku's voice was warm but absolute. "I need you to run. Get to the main campus, bring the rest of the teachers. Can you do that for me?" "But the villains are between us and the exit?" "I'll open a path." Izuku turned back to face the incoming horde. 200 villains, give or take. He rolled his shoulders, shifted Ace in his grip, and took a single step forward. "Everyone else," he said, loud enough for the whole class to hear, "stay behind me. These guys picked the wrong crew to mess with." "Midoriya, you can't fight all of them," Yaoyorozu started. Izuku planted his feet. He let out a breath, and he unleashed his Conqueror's Haki. It hit the facility like a bomb. The pressure radiated outward from Izuku in a visible shockwave. The air itself distorted, rippling, bending as pure willpower crashed into every living thing in the USJ. His classmates behind him felt it like a warm wind at their backs. Strong, electric, that raising the hair on their arms but holding them up rather than pushing them down. The villains in front of him felt something very, very different. They dropped in waves like wheat before a scythe. The first rank, 20 villains, hit the ground before they even registered what was happening. Eyes rolling white, foam at their mouths, unconscious before their faces met the tile. The second rank followed, then the third, then the fourth. Villains collapsed in expanding circles, radiating outward from Izuku's position. Bodies folded. Weapons clattered to the floor. 100 unconscious criminals in the span of 3 seconds. 120. 150. 180. When Izuku closed his fist and pulled the Haki back, only a handful of villains remained standing. The ones closest to the hand-covered man and the mist figure. The stronger ones, the ones with enough will to resist. Maybe 15 total out of the original 200. The floor of USJ was carpeted with unconscious bodies. Class 1A stood behind Izuku in complete silence. Uraraka had tears in her eyes and she couldn't explain why. Todoroki's left side was smoking. His fire had ignited involuntarily in response to the wave of power that washed over him. Bakugo's hands were shaking and he hated it, hated it, hated it. Aizawa, halfway down the stairs with his capture weapon mid-swing, had frozen entirely. He turned his head to look at Izuku and for the first time in his career, felt like he was looking at something beyond the scope of what he understood. Down in the plaza, the hand-covered man, Shigaraki Tomura, scratched his neck so hard it drew blood. His remaining villains stood around him in various states of terror, staring up at the green-haired boy on the stairs who had just flattened 90% of their forces without moving. What was that? Shigaraki hissed. Kurogiri, what is that? I am uncertain, Shigaraki Tomura. The mist villain's yellow eyes were wide. That was unprecedented. Izuku laughed. It echoed through the facility, bouncing off the dome ceiling, filling every corner of the space with impossible, reckless joy. Come on, he shouted down at the remaining villains, pointing Ace at them. Is that really all you brought? I was hoping for a challenge. Ida. He didn't look back. Go. Now. Ida, for once in his life, didn't argue. He turned and ran for the exit faster than he'd ever moved. Izuku vaulted the railing and dropped to the central plaza. The remaining villains scattered as he landed. He let them go. They were nothing. Fodder. His observation haki could feel them fleeing to the edges of the facility, running from him like fish from a shark. He kept his focus on the only 3 threats that mattered: Shigaraki, Kurogiri, and the Nomu. Aizawa landed beside him. Midoriya, what the hell was that? Told you. Teach. Izuku didn't take his eyes off the Nomu. Just a guy with big dreams. He shifted his stance, bringing Ace up into a guard position. That big one. It's strong. I can feel it. You handle the scratchy guy in the mist, yeah? Aizawa wanted to argue. Every fiber of his being as a teacher said to push this kid behind him and handle it alone. But he just watched a 15-year-old knock out 200 villains with a look, and some battles you picked and some battles picked you. If you start losing, you pull back immediately, Aizawa said. Won't happen. Izuku was already walking forward. But sure, Shigaraki cocked his head, watching Izuku approach. His red eyes gleamed behind father's fingers. Nomu, Shigaraki said. Kill him. The Nomu moved. It was fast, impossibly fast for something that big. It crossed 20 meters in a blink and threw a punch that would have reduced a normal human to paste. The fist came down like a meteorite, aimed at Izuku's skull. Izuku raised ace and parried. The impact shattered the tiles beneath his feet in a 10-foot radius. The shockwave blew outward in a ring, flattening debris, sending dust clouds billowing. Izuku's arm should have broken. His sword should have shattered. Instead, the haki-coated blade caught the Nomu's fist and held, and Izuku's grin didn't waver by a single millimeter. "Oh," he said, his voice filled with genuine delight. "You're actually strong." The Nomu swung again, and again. A barrage of punches that turned the air into a blur of black fists and displaced wind. Izuku deflected, dodged, weaved between strikes with the fluid grace of Observation Haki, reading every attack before it happened. He moved like water around a stone, his blade flashing black with every parry. "Shock absorption, huh?" Izuku said, having felt the way his attacks distributed across the creature's body. "And regeneration, too. That's fun." His grin sharpened. "Let me show you something." He stopped dodging. He planted his feet and raised ace above his head. The Nomu, following its programming, threw another devastating punch, and this time Izuku didn't parry. He swung to meet it. But this swing was different. The air around Ace crackled. Black lightning arced along the blade, the same black and red energy that had split the zero-pointer. Conqueror's Haki, infused directly into the sword, coating it in a power that went beyond physical force. This wasn't an attack that could be absorbed. This wasn't kinetic energy. This was will. Pure dominating, royal will. Blade met fist. The Nomu's arm exploded. From wrist to shoulder, the limb simply detonated outward, flesh and black muscle and synthetic tissue ripping apart as the Conqueror's Haki tore through it from the inside. The creature staggered backward, its remaining arms swinging wildly, its exposed brain pulsing with confused signals. It tried to regenerate. Black threads of muscle began reforming, reaching out to rebuild the arm. Izuku didn't give it time. He blurred forward, a single step that covered the distance between them in a heartbeat, and drove Ace into the Nomu's chest. The blade sank to the hilt, coated in that crackling black lightning, and the Conqueror's Haki detonated inside the creature. The effect was total. Every organ in the Nomu's body ruptured simultaneously. Regeneration, shock absorption, enhanced strength. None of it mattered when the attack bypassed the physical entirely and struck at the core of the thing's existence. The Nomu's dead eyes went even deader. Its body seized, twitched, and then went still on Izuku's blade. Izuku ripped Ace free with a flick of his wrist and spun the blade once, sending a spray of dark fluid across the plaza tiles. The Nomu collapsed behind him like a puppet with its strings cut, one swing to destroy the arm. One thrust to end it. Total elapsed time, 4 seconds. Shigaraki Tomura stood 10 meters away, watching his anti-All Might bioweapon bleed out on the floor, and for the first time in his life felt something beyond petulant rage. He felt terror. Izuku turned to face him. Ace rested on his shoulder, still dripping. His grin was the widest it had been all day, manic, brilliant, alive in a way that made him look less like a teenager and more like a storm wearing human skin. "That your strongest?" Izuku asked, tilting his head. "Come on, I was just getting warmed up." Shigaraki's hand flew to his own neck, scratching, scratching, scratching until the skin broke. "Kurogiri, we're leaving." "A wise decision," the mist villain said, already expanding a warp gate behind them. Izuku pointed Ace at Shigaraki's chest. "Next time you come after my crew, bring a stronger one. I'll be waiting." Shigaraki paused at the edge of the warp gate. His red eyes locked on Izuku through the gaps in father's fingers. "Who are you?" Izuku's grin softened into something warm and ancient and impossibly knowing. Just a man who loves adventure. The warp gate swallowed Shigaraki and Kurogiri, and they were gone. In the aftermath, Class 1A stood in the ruins of USJ and tried to process what they'd seen. The other teachers arrived 7 minutes after Ida's warning. All Might, Snipe, Ectoplasm, and a dozen others, only to find the battle already over. 200 villains unconscious on the floor. The Nomu, the creature designed to kill All Might, dead at the feet of a first-year student. and Izuku Midoriya sitting on the plaza steps, cleaning his blade with a strip of cloth, humming that sea shanty again. All Might, in his muscle form, stood over the Nomu's body and felt his blood run cold. I can feel it, he thought. The residual energy. Whatever he did to this thing, it tore it apart from the inside. This creature had shock absorption and hyper-regeneration. It was built to fight me. And this boy killed it in seconds. He looked at Izuku, who was chatting with Uraraka and Kirishima as if he'd just finished a gym workout, instead of single-handedly saving 24 people from a villain ambush. I was wrong, Toshinori realized. When he rejected One for All, I thought he was being reckless. Prideful, but he was right. He doesn't need it. He doesn't need me. He might be stronger than me already. The thought was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Midoriya. Aizawa's voice cut through the noise. The underground hero stood in front of Izuku, bloodshot eyes burning with intensity. My office. After debrief. Sure thing. Teach. Izuku sheathed Ace and stood up, stretching. Can I bring snacks? No. I'm bringing snacks. Aizawa's office was small, dark, and featured a sleeping bag in the corner that was clearly used more than the desk. Izuku sat across from his homeroom teacher, feet up, eating an onigiri he'd grabbed from the vending machine. Explain, Aizawa said. One word. Flat. Explain what? Everything. What you did. What that power is. Why you're registered quirkless when you clearly possess something that goes beyond any quirk I've ever seen. Izuku chewed his onigiri thoughtfully. He swallowed. It's called Haki, he said. 3 types. Armament, Observation, and Conquerors. Armament lets me coat my body in an invisible armor. I can make it visible, that's the black stuff. Observation lets me sense people's presence and predict their moves. And Conquerors, he grinned. Conquerors lets me impose my will on others. Knock out the weak-willed, intimidate the strong, and at its highest level, coat my attacks in a force that bypasses physical defenses entirely. And this isn't a quirk. Note, it's willpower. Every human technically has the potential for the first 2 types. Conquerors is different, you're born with it. 1 in a million, maybe less. He took another bite of rice. The doctors said I'm quirkless, and they're right. I've got an extra toe joint and everything. This is something else. Aizawa stared at him. The boy's pulse was steady. His pupils were stable. He was telling the truth, or at least he believed he was. Where did you learn this? Izuku's grin got that edge to it again. The one that made you feel like you were looking at 2 people at once. A teenager and someone much, much older. Some things you just know, Izuku said, like they're written in your bones. Aizawa stared at him for another 10 seconds. Then he sighed, reached for his sleeping bag, and dismissed him. The sports festival arrived 3 weeks after the USJ incident, and it arrived like a thunderstorm that had been building for days. The atmosphere inside UA was electric. Every student, every teacher, every support company representative who had bought a stadium ticket knew one name, Izuku Midoriya. The quirkless first year who had soloed a villain army, the boy with the black sword who scored infinity on his entrance exam, the one the internet was already calling the King of UA after a leaked security clip from the apprehension test went viral. Izuku couldn't care less about the attention. He cared about the fights. He walked into the stadium with his class, Ace on his back, and looked up at the 80,000 screaming fans packing the stands. His grin stretched ear to ear. The lights, the noise, the energy. It reminded him of something, an arena, a ring of people, a stage where legends were made, Marineford, whispered the voice in his soul. Sabayori, the Grand Line's greatest spectacles. This is going to be fun, Izuku roared, throwing both fists in the air, and half of Class 1A jumped at the volume. Present Mike's voice thundered from the speakers. The first event of the first-year sports festival, the obstacle race. All 11 classes competing simultaneously. The starting tunnel was chaos. Hundreds of students packed shoulder to shoulder, waiting for the signal. Izuku stood at the very front, arms crossed, unbothered by the press of bodies around him. Todoroki was 3 meters to his right. Bakugo was 5 meters behind and vibrating with rage. Start! Todoroki immediately slammed his right foot down. Ice erupted forward, trying to freeze the ground and every competitor in the tunnel, a signature move to gain an early lead. Izuku didn't even flinch. His feet remained planted. Armament Haki coated the soles of his shoes, and the ice cracked and shattered the instant it touched him. unable to cling to that impenetrable surface. While every other student in the tunnel either froze in place or scrambled to avoid the ice, Izuku simply walked forward through the spreading frost like it was a light dusting of snow. Todoroki, already running ahead, glanced over his shoulder and saw the green-haired boy strolling through his ice field with his hands in his pockets. Something cold that had nothing to do with his quirk ran down Todoroki's spine. Izuku stopped walking and started running. He was fast, terrifyingly fast. Haki-reinforced legs pushed him to speeds that ate ground in enormous gulps, blurring past frozen competitors like they were standing still. He caught up to Todoroki before the first obstacle, a rank of giant villain bots blocking the path. "Hey, Todoroki!" Izuku called out as he ran past, grinning. "First one to the finish buys the other lunch." Todoroki said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Izuku hit the robots at full sprint. Ace came free in a singing arc of black-coated steel, and 3 robots fell in pieces before the competitors behind them could even process what happened. Izuku vaulted over the wreckage, laughed, and kept running. He won the obstacle race by 45 seconds. He didn't even use his full speed. The cavalry battle was next. Teams of 4, headbands worth points based on your finish in the race. First place got a 10 million point headband. Izuku wore his 10 million on his forehead like a crown. "I need a crew," he announced to the gathered first years. "Who wants to ride with the king?" Nobody moved for 3 seconds. 10 million points. Every team in the festival would be targeting them. It was a suicide squad. Then Uraraka stepped forward. "I'm in." Then Kirishima. "Hell yeah, let's do it." Then, unexpectedly, Tokoyami, the bird-headed boy with the shadow creature. "Your strength, it resonates. I'll join." Izuku grinned at his team. Perfect crew. The cavalry battle lasted 15 minutes on paper. In practice, it lasted about 3 minutes of actual competition before every other team realized that attacking Izuku's group was functionally the same as running headfirst into a brick wall. Teams approached. Izuku released controlled pulses of Conqueror's Haki, just enough to stagger, just enough to buy space. Uraraka made them light when they needed to dodge. Kirishima hardened when they needed to tank. Tokoyami's dark shadow lashed out at anyone who got too close. But the core defense was always Izuku. His Observation Haki tracked every team in the arena simultaneously. His armament protected against any ranged attack. And whenever a team got genuinely close, when Bakugo came rocketing in on explosions with murder in his eyes, Izuku looked at him, just looked at him, and Bakugo flinched. Every time. He couldn't help it. His body remembered what his mind refused to. When the timer hit 0, Team Midoriya still had 10 million points, plus another 4 million they'd swiped from other teams, because Izuku treated the whole event like a game, and Uraraka's fingers were quicker than anyone expected. They advanced to the finals bracket. Along with Todoroki, Bakugo, Ida, Tokoyami, Kirishima, and a handful of others, Izuku sat in the stands between rounds, eating a massive bowl of katsudon from the festival food stalls and watched the bracket fill in. His match path was clear, a couple of preliminary opponents, then, if the seeds held, Todoroki in the finals. He couldn't wait. The tournament fights before the finals were efficient. Izuku dismantled his opponents with the bare minimum of force required to wring them out, almost apologetic about it. A pulse of Conqueror's Haki knocked his first opponent unconscious before they could blink. His second opponent, a girl from Class 1B with a vine quirk, launched everything she had at him and Izuku simply walked through it. Armament Haki rendering her vines useless against his body before he picked her up gently and set her down outside the ring. "Good fight," he told her with a genuine smile, and she turned red and couldn't tell if she was angry or flustered. Bakugo fought his way to the semifinals with raw fury and explosive power, demolishing every opponent through sheer aggression. He won. He always won. But the crowd wasn't chanting his name, they were chanting Izuku's. Bakugo's semifinal match was against Tokoyami. He won in a devastating display of firepower, but when he looked up at the stands afterward, searching for Izuku's reaction, the green-haired bastard was asleep with his head on Uraraka's shoulder. Uraraka was very red and very still, and very much refusing to breathe too hard. Todoroki Shoto's semifinal match was against Ida. It was the most lopsided fight of the tournament. Todoroki froze the entire ring in an instant, stopping Ida's legs before he could build speed, and ended it in 4 seconds flat. The crowd cheered, but Todoroki's expression stayed empty. He used his ice and only his ice, just like always. The fire side, his left side, stayed dormant. When the finalists were announced, the stadium erupted. Izuku Midoriya versus Shoto Todoroki. The crowd knew what this was. The internet knew what this was. Even the pro heroes in the VIP section, Endeavor among them, his flame beard blazing with anticipation, knew what this was. The unstoppable force meets the immovable wall. Izuku walked into the ring with ace sheathed on his back and his hands in his pockets. Todoroki entered from the opposite side, his heterochromatic eyes, one gray, one turquoise, locked onto Izuku with the kind of focus that came from treating every fight like it might be his last. Midnight raised her whip. Final match, Midoriya versus Todoroki. Hajime! Todoroki stomped his right foot and the world turned white. A glacier, an actual honest-to-God glacier, erupted from his foot and surged toward Izuku in a tidal wave of frost. It was bigger than anything Todoroki had produced all tournament. A mountain of ice meant to end the fight in one overwhelming strike. The crowd gasped. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. The glacier's shadow swallowed Izuku whole. Izuku stood there. He looked at the incoming ice wall, 10 meters high, 20 meters wide, racing toward him at terrifying speed. And he smiled. The kind of smile that said he'd been waiting for this. He drew ace in a single fluid motion. The blade went black. The air crackled. One swing, not divine departure. He saved that for when he meant it. Just a single, haki-coated horizontal slash that sent a wave of compressed air screaming forward. It met the glacier at its base and cut through. The entire ice mountain split in half horizontally, the top half sliding backward, toppling, shattering into a rain of crystalline fragments that caught the stadium lights like a billion diamonds. The bottom half remained, a 4-meter wall of ice, and Izuku leaped over it in a single bound. He landed on the other side, 10 meters from Todoroki, grinning. "That all?" Izuku asked. "Come on, Todoroki, I know you've got more." Todoroki's eyes widened. He threw his arm forward. Another ice wave, faster, sharper, targeted spears of frost aimed at Izuku's legs, his arms, his center mass. A dozen javelins of ice launched simultaneously. Izuku's eyes flashed. Observation Haki mapped every trajectory before the ice was even fully formed. He moved, blade singing, and cut through each javelin in a blur of black steel. Shattered ice rained around him like confetti. "More," Izuku laughed, and his voice carried across the stadium. "Is this really all you've got?" Todoroki sent wave after wave, ice walls, ice spikes, a frozen floor meant to trap Izuku's feet. Izuku danced through all of it, blade flashing, laughter ringing, never slowing, never struggling. He was having the time of his life, and everyone could see it. But Todoroki was getting colder. His right side was frosting over, skin turning blue, movements growing sluggish. He was reaching his limit with ice alone. And still, the green-haired boy kept coming, kept laughing, kept cutting through everything Todoroki had. Izuku stopped advancing. He stood in the center of the ring, surrounded by shattered ice and sheathed ace. Todoroki blinked. "What are you?" "You're holding back," Izuku said. His voice was different. The laughter was still there, underneath, but now something else sat on top of it. Something older. Something that carried the weight of a man who had seen people chain themselves to their own pain and throw away their freedom because they couldn't let go of someone else's cruelty. "Your left side," Izuku said. "The fire. You won't use it." Todoroki's expression cracked. For the first time all tournament, emotion bled through. Anger, pain, something raw and wounded. "You don't know anything about..." "I know a cage man when I see one." Izuku took a step forward. "That fire isn't your old man's, it's yours. Your body, your power, your life. And you're going to stand there and let some bastard who hurt you decide what you're allowed to be?" Todoroki's left hand trembled. Frost crackled across his right shoulder. "My mother." Todoroki started, and his voice broke. "Your mother would want you to be free." Izuku's voice softened but lost none of its conviction. Inherited will, the dreams of your people, the flow of time, these things, they can't be stopped. As long as people seek the meaning of freedom, they will never stop. The words poured out of him like they'd been waiting his entire life to be said. Like they belonged to someone who had stood at the top of the world and understood, truly understood, what it meant to live and die on your own terms. Stop fighting against yourself, Todoroki. Stop giving that man power over you. Light your fire and fight me for real. Todoroki stared at him. His left hand shook. Tears he couldn't explain gathered at the corners of his eyes. And then, whoosh, Todoroki's left side ignited. Flames erupted from his body in a column that reached toward the sky, orange and gold and roaring with heat. The frost on his right side evaporated instantly. Color flooded back into his skin. His eyes, both of them, blazed with something new, something fierce and terrified and alive. The stadium lost its mind. 80,000 people surging to their feet. Present Mike's voice cracking as he screamed into the microphone. In the VIP section, Endeavor rose from his seat, his own flames flickering, his face twisted in something between triumph and confusion because this wasn't for him. This wasn't his victory. This was Todoroki's. "You want everything I have?" Todoroki said, and his voice was raw and breaking and more honest than anything he'd ever said. Flames danced across his left arm, ice reformed on his right. He brought both hands together and fire and ice swirled into a maelstrom of elemental fury. "Then take it!" He launched everything, a simultaneous blast of fire and ice, a hurricane of opposing elements that fused into something greater than either alone. It tore across the ring with the force of a natural disaster, hot enough to melt steel on one side, cold enough to freeze nitrogen on the other. The sheer energy output cracked the concrete beneath it and sent shockwaves rippling through the stadium. Izuku watched it come. His grin was the widest it had been all day. His eyes were shining. "There it is," the voice inside him whispered. "That's the fire of a free man." He drew ace. The blade went beyond black. That crackling energy returned. Conqueror's Haki coating, arcing along the edge in veins of black lightning and crimson sparks. The air around the sword screamed, distorting, bending, breaking under the weight of Izuku's will made manifest. Izuku raised the blade above his head. "Divine departure!" He swung. The crescent wave of Conqueror's infused force erupted from Ace's edge and crashed headlong into Todoroki's combined attack. Fire and ice met will and lightning in the center of the ring, and for one impossible moment, the two forces held each other in perfect, screaming equilibrium. Then, Izuku's attack punched through. The divine departure carved through fire and ice like they didn't exist, continuing forward in a wave of black and red energy that slammed into Todoroki with the force of a freight train wrapped in a thunderstorm. The impact launched him off his feet, sent him flying backward, and blasted him clean out of the ring into the stadium wall behind him with enough force to crater the concrete. The shockwave from the clash blew outward in all directions. Stadium seats cracked. The concrete ring split in a spiderweb of fractures. Every flag in the arena ripped from its pole. Present Mike's broadcasting equipment sparked and shorted for 3 seconds. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence in a stadium of 80,000 people. Izuku stood in the center of the destroyed ring, Ace resting on his shoulder, breathing easy. His uniform was scorched on the left side and frosted on the right, but he was standing. He was always standing. His grin was pure joy. In the crater in the wall, Todoroki slumped, unconscious, out of bounds, finished. But on his face, for the first time anyone could remember, was something that looked like peace. "Todoroki is out of bounds." Midnight's voice broke the silence. "The winner of the UA Sports Festival first-year tournament, Izuku Midoriya!" The stadium erupted. It was a wall of sound. 80,000 voices screaming at once. Students on their feet, pounding the seats, hugging strangers. In the Class 1A section, Uraraka was crying and laughing simultaneously. Ida was standing at rigid attention with tears streaming down his face, overcome by the sheer nobility of what he'd just witnessed. Kirishima was screaming, "That's the manliest thing I've ever seen!" at the top of his lungs. Bakugo sat in silence, staring at the ring, his hands white-knuckled on his armrests. In the VIP section, Endeavor stood frozen. His masterpiece, his carefully bred weapon, had just ignited his fireside for the first time in years. And it hadn't been for him. It hadn't been because of his training or his pressure or his will. It had been because a quirkless boy with a sword asked Todoroki to be free. Endeavor's flames guttered and went low. Down in the ring, Izuku sheathed Ace, walked to the edge of the arena and looked up at the stands. He raised one fist to the sky. "That's what it means to be alive!" he roared, and his voice carried over the crowd noise through sheer force of personality. "Never stop chasing your freedom." The chant started small, a few voices in the student section. Then it spread. "Me, Doriya!" Midoriya! Midoriya! 80,000 people unified in a single name. Izuku threw his head back and laughed, and it was the purest, most joyful sound anyone in that stadium had ever heard. Recovery Girl patched Todoroki up in the medical bay. When he woke, the first thing he did was touch his left hand, warm, tingling, alive in a way it hadn't been since he was 5, and something that might have been a smile tugged at his mouth. "That bastard," Todoroki whispered, staring at the ceiling. "He actually made me." The door opened. Izuku leaned in, grinning, holding 2 yakisoba breads from the cafeteria. "Hey, you owe me lunch." He tossed one of the breads to Todoroki. "But I'll settle for this." Todoroki caught it, stared at it, then looked at Izuku with eyes that were seeing him for the first time, really seeing him, the boy who had punched through his walls and shown him the sky on the other side. "Thank you," Todoroki said. The words came out awkward and stiff, like they'd never been used before. "For what you said." Izuku's grin softened. "That's what crewmates do." "Crewmates? You're crew now, Todoroki. Like it or hate it, I'm keeping you." Todoroki took a bite of his yakisoba bread and didn't argue. Something warm, and for once it had nothing to do with fire, settled in his chest. The awards ceremony was perfunctory. Izuku stood on the podium with the gold medal around his neck, and All Might himself placing it there, beaming in his muscle form. "Well done, young Midoriya," All Might murmured, low enough that the cameras couldn't catch it. "You've surpassed every expectation. I'm just getting started," Izuku murmured back, matching his quiet volume. Then louder, for the crowd. "Thanks, All Might. Now where's the after party?" The crowd laughed, the cameras flashed, the internet exploded with clips of the final clash, the divine departure versus Todoroki's combined elemental assault. Within 6 hours, Izuku Midoriya was trending #1 worldwide. Fan edits hit YouTube within the day, set to heavy metal and One Piece as soundtracks, because somehow people just felt the connection even if they couldn't name it. After the sports festival, Class 1A settled into a new normal. A normal that revolved, whether anyone admitted it or not, around the gravity well of Izuku Midoriya. He trained with anyone who asked. He dragged Todoroki to lunch with the crew, whether Todoroki liked it or not. He liked it eventually. He arm wrestled Kirishima for fun and let the redhead think he almost won. He helped Uraraka practice her quirk control by volunteering to be made weightless and turning it into increasingly ridiculous aerial stunts. He called Ida Commander and gave him genuine authority over planning and logistics for their group study sessions because Izuku understood that a king's strength was his crew's strength. Even Bakugo, bitter, furious, seething Bakugo, began to shift. The gap between them was so vast that rivalry had become meaningless. You couldn't rival the sun. Slowly, grudgingly, silently, Bakugo began to accept that the boy he'd spent 10 years refusing to acknowledge was simply operating on a different level. He still hated it. But the hatred was curdling into something else, something that might, given a decade or so, become respect. Internship week arrived, and with it, the opportunity for students to shadow pro-heroes at their agencies. Izuku's inbox was drowning in offers. Every major agency in Japan wanted the sports festival champion, the boy who had broken the internet, the mysterious, quirkless king. Izuku picked Gran Torino. Nobody understood why. Gran Torino was a retired hero, barely known, living alone in a beat-up apartment. But Izuku had heard the name from All Might in passing, felt something resonate in his gut, and went with it. Also, the old man's application letter just said, "Come over, I have snacks." Izuku respected the energy. Gran Torino turned out to be a cranky, ancient, impossibly fast old man who spent the first day testing Izuku's reflexes by bouncing off walls at Mach speed and kicking him in the head repeatedly. Izuku blocked every kick with Observation Haki, laughing the whole time. "You're fast for a fossil," Izuku said, parrying a shin to his temple with a Haki-coated forearm. "And you're cocky for a brat," Gran Torino shot back, ricocheting off the ceiling. "What happened to the crying kid Toshinori told me about?" "Wrong guy," Izuku said, catching Gran Torino's ankle mid-kick and grinning. "I've never cried a day in my life." Figures." The old man extracted himself and landed on his kitchen counter. "Toshinori always was a bad judge of character." They got along immediately. On the third night of his internship, Izuku felt it. Through his Observation Haki, expanded, sharpened, reaching across the cityscape of Hosu like an invisible net, he felt pain. fear, and killing intent so sharp it cut like a razor. 3 signals. One was fading fast, weakening, dying. One was terrified, paralyzed. And one was a bonfire of murderous conviction, steady and focused and righteous. Izuku was out the window before Gran Torino could shout. He hit the rooftops of Hosu at a dead sprint, ace in his hand, following the pull of those signals through the dark city. The night air smelled like smoke. There were fires in the distance, Nomu attacks drawing the heroes away. But Izuku's focus was locked on that alley. That specific alley where his crewmate was about to die. Because the terrified signal was Tenya Ida, and Izuku would know his crew's presence anywhere in the world. The alley was narrow, dark, and stank of blood. Native, a pro hero, Izuku recognized from the news, lay crumpled against the wall, bleeding from deep cuts, barely conscious. Ida was on his knees 5 feet away, his legs locked in place by dried blood. Stain's quirk, his paralysis through blood ingestion. Ida's face was a mask of rage and self-hatred, his brother's crippling fresh in his mind, his own body refusing to obey, and standing over both of them, katana raised, was the hero killer. Stain, red scarf, bandaged face, flat nose pressed against the blade of his weapon, eyes like a predator who had decided which prey to finish first. Fake heroes, Stain was saying, his voice a gravelly rasp. Society breeds them by the dozen, children playing dress-up, calling themselves saviors, polluting the name of Oi. Stain froze. Izuku stood at the mouth of the alley, ace resting on his shoulder, silhouetted against the faint orange glow of distant fires. His green eyes caught the streetlight and turned them into something that belonged on a wanted poster. Who? Stain started. You're the hero killer, right? Izuku walked forward, casual, unhurried. His footsteps echoed in the narrow space. Gotta say, the whole dark alley murder thing is pretty lame. I expected more from a guy the news calls legendary. Stain's eyes narrowed. If his stance shifted, katana angling to account for the new threat. Another hero brat? You reek of youth and arrogance. And you reek of actual blood, so I'd say we both have problems. Izuku stopped 10 feet away, his grin carved into his face like it was permanent. Here's how this goes. That guy behind you, the one in the armor, he's mine. He's my crew, and you're standing over him with a weapon. Your crew. Stain tilted his head. His tongue, long, grotesque, flickered out and ran along the edge of his blade. You sound like a child playing pirate. I get that a lot. The hero society is rotten, Stain continued, his voice gaining fervor. Corrupt, built on lies and self-service. These fakes, these parasites, disgrace the title of hero. Only through blood can the system be... I'm going to stop you right there. Izuku raised a hand. I don't care. Stain blinked. I genuinely, honestly, from the bottom of my heart, could not give less of a damn about your philosophy, your manifesto, or your opinion on hero society. Izuku lowered his hand and gripped Ace properly. The blade slid to a ready position at his side, the first hint of black Haki crackling at its edge. You threatened my crewmate. That's all I need to know. That's the only fact in this entire conversation that matters. So let me make this real simple for you, Stain. Izuku's grin sharpened until it was less a smile and more a baring of teeth. I'm about to kick your ass. Stain stared at him. In 23 kills and countless confrontations, the hero killer had never encountered someone who looked at him with absolute zero fear. Heroes trembled. Villains negotiated. Everyone, without exception, acknowledged the threat he represented. This boy looked at him like he was an inconvenience. Interesting, Stain said, and something shifted in his stance. No longer sizing up, now committed. Let's see if you're worthy. He moved. Stain was fast. Legitimately fast. A lifetime of killing had honed his reflexes to the peak of human capability. He crossed 6 feet in a heartbeat, katana slashing in a lateral arc aimed at Izuku's throat, the same opening strike that had ended a dozen heroes. Izuku's blade met his. The clash rang through the alley like a bell. Sparks flew, and then Stain's eyes went wide. His katana was shaking. The edge was cracking. Izuku's ace, coated in jet black Armament Haki, hadn't budged a millimeter, and the force behind the block was sending fracture lines spider-webbing through Stain's inferior steel. That all you got? Izuku said, their blades still locked. Stain disengaged, leaping back, pulling a throwing knife from his bandolier, and flicking it at Izuku's face in the same motion. Izuku tilted his head an inch to the left. Observation Haki had read the trajectory before Stain's fingers released, and the knife sailed past his ear and embedded itself in the brick wall behind him. Stain was already coming again. Two more knives thrown in rapid succession, followed by a lunging thrust aimed at Izuku's heart. Fast. Precise. The attacks of a man who had killed heroes for years, Izuku deflected both knives with casual swipes of aces flat, then sidestepped the thrust entirely. Stain's katana stabbed into empty air where Izuku's chest had been a half-second prior. Sloppy, Izuku said, and swung. Ace caught Stain's katana in the middle of the blade. The hero killer tried to pull back, tried to disengage, but Izuku's swing carried too much force. The Haki-coated edge bit into Stain's weapon like a shark through driftwood. The katana shattered. The top 2/3 of the blade spun away into the darkness, clattering against the alley wall. Stain stumbled backward, holding nothing but a handle and 4 inches of broken steel, his eyes wide for the first time in years. "You," Stain hissed, and there was something in his voice that might have been respect. "Your blade, that black coating, what is that?" "The will of a king," Izuku said, and he was already closing the distance. Stain abandoned his broken katana and drew 2 more knives, shorter, faster, easier to maneuver in tight quarters. He slashed at Izuku's wrist, trying to cut him, trying to draw blood so his quirk could paralyze. If he could just taste this boy's blood. Izuku read it. Of course he read it. Every move Stain made was an open book to Observation Haki. The muscle tension, the eye direction, the slight shift in center of gravity that preceded each strike. Stain was fast. Stain was skilled. Stain was the greatest close combat threat in Japan's criminal underworld. And Izuku Midoriya was Gol D Roger, the Pirate King, the man who conquered the Grand Line and laughed at his own death. There was no comparison. Izuku sheathed ace. Stain's eyes flickered with confusion. And then Izuku was inside his guard, moving faster than the hero killer could track, and a fist coated in Armament Haki buried itself in Stain's gut. The impact was devastating. Stain's feet left the ground. His body folded around Izuku's fist like wet paper. The ribs on both sides of the punch point fractured simultaneously. A sound like snapping branches, sharp and final. The shockwave of the blow blasted outward behind Stain, cracking the brick wall at the end of the alley in a spiderweb pattern and sending loose garbage and debris flying. Stain's knives fell from his hands. His eyes bulged. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. All the air in his lungs was gone, replaced by an agony so total it erased thought. He hit the ground on his back and didn't get up. The hero killer of Hosu, the man who had murdered 17 pro heroes and crippled 23 more, lay in a crumpled heap at the feet of a 15-year-old boy, and he could not move. The fight had lasted 11 seconds. Behind them, Ida watched with his mouth open and tears running down his face. The paralysis from Stain's quirk was fading. It had a time limit, and the blood Stain had taken was minimal. But Ida couldn't have moved even if his body let him. He was frozen by something beyond a quirk. He was frozen by awe. "Midoriya," Ida whispered. "How?" Izuku turned. His face was unreadable for a moment, rare for him. And then the grin came back. Warm. Easy. Like he just finished helping someone carry groceries instead of demolishing a serial killer. "I told you, Commander." He walked to Ida and crouched down, putting a hand on his friend's shoulder. "Crew sticks together." I came here for revenge," Ida said, his voice cracking. "For my brother, I was so... Hey." Izuku squeezed his shoulder. "You're alive. That's what matters. And your brother would say the same thing." Ida broke. He sobbed. Ugly, heaving, cathartic sobs, and Izuku stayed there, crouched beside hand on his shoulder, waiting. Giving him the space to fall apart and the anchor to put himself back together. Behind them, Stain groaned. Izuku glanced over his shoulder. The hero killer was trying to push himself up, shattered ribs and all, trying to rise, because that was the kind of man he was. A zealot who would fight until his body physically couldn't anymore. Izuku's Observation Haki felt it. The flicker of consciousness, the determination, the absolute refusal to stay down. He respected it in a way. Stain was wrong about almost everything, but he believed in something with his whole soul. That was more than most people could say. "Stay down," Izuku called over his shoulder. "Your ribs are broken in at least 6 places. You'll puncture a lung if you keep moving." Stain's one visible eye locked onto Izuku. Blood dripped from his mouth. His breathing was ragged, shallow, agonized. "You." Stain rasped. What are you? Izuku stood up, pulled Ida to his feet with one arm, and turned to face the hero killer one last time. The fires of Hosu reflected in the sky above them. The distant sounds of combat echoed through the city. And Izuku Midoriya stood in that dark alley with his crewmate behind him and his enemy before him. And he answered, I'm the guy who's going to be the greatest hero in the world, on my own terms, with my own power. He tilted his head, and that grin, that damnable, inextinguishable grin, spread across his face one more time. And anyone who threatens the people I love gets exactly what you just got. Stain stared at him. His eye, the one uncovered by bandages, held something complex. Hatred, respect, recognition. You. Stain let out a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been his broken ribs shifting. You might be the only real one I've ever met. Then he passed out. The pro heroes arrived 4 minutes later. Endeavor was first, his flames lighting the alley entrance, followed by Manuel and Gran Torino. They found Izuku supporting Ida, who was supporting Native, and Stain bound with strips of his own scarf at the end of the alley, unconscious and secured. The hero killer, Endeavor said, his voice filled with something between disbelief and irritation. You, a child, took down the hero killer. In about 10 seconds, yeah. Izuku's tone was casual to the point of insulting. He talked a lot. The actual fight was the short part. Endeavor's flames flickered. He looked at this green-haired boy, the one who had also made his son ignite his flames for the first time in a decade, and felt something he was utterly unequipped to process. Gran Torino landed beside Izuku and thwacked him on the head with his cane. I told you to stay in the apartment. You told me to eat dinner. I ate dinner. Then I left. Izuku rubbed his head, still grinning. Besides, my crew was in danger. Nothing keeps me from that. Gran Torino looked at him. Really looked, the way old men look at young men who remind them of someone they lost, and sighed. Toshinori was right about you, the old hero muttered. You really are something else. The weeks after Hosu blurred together in a rush of paperwork, debriefs, and media circus. The official report credited Endeavor with Stain's defeat, a political maneuver that made Gran Torino grunt with disgust and made Izuku laugh until his sides hurt. Let them have it. He knew what happened. Ida knew. That was enough. What mattered more was the way Ida stood straighter after that night. The guilt stayed. It would stay for a long time, maybe forever. But it lived alongside something new. A purpose that belonged to Ida himself rather than his brother's ghost. He threw himself into his training with a ferocity that surprised the rest of the class, and whenever someone asked why, he just glanced at Izuku and said, I have someone I refuse to fall behind. Summer crawled forward. The provisional hero license exam loomed on the horizon like a coming storm, and Class 1A trained for it with everything they had. Aizawa pushed them harder than ever, extra drills, extended sparring sessions, and a combat exercise regimen that left half the class limping to the dorms every evening. Izuku trained alongside them, but his training looked different. While his classmates refined their quirks and pushed their limits, Izuku sat on the roof of Heights Alliance at midnight, eyes closed, ace across his knees, and expanded his Observation Haki until he could feel every heartbeat in the dormitory below. Until he could sense the security guards patrolling the campus perimeter. Until he could feel Aizawa, 3 buildings away, pretending to sleep while grading papers. He was sharpening himself. The Stain fight had been too easy. 11 seconds, 1 punch. And while that was satisfying in its own way, it told him something important. His current enemies were beneath him, which meant the enemies coming would be worse. The universe had a way of escalating, of sending bigger waves the further you sailed. And Izuku had sailed this kind of ocean before. The provisional license exam took place at the Takoba National Stadium, a massive facility redesigned every year to accommodate different test scenarios. Over 1,500 students from schools across the country converged on the site, and the tension in the air was thick enough to taste. Izuku walked through the crowd with Ace on his back and his hands in his pockets, drinking in the energy. Students from Shiketsu, Ketsubutsu, and half a dozen other schools gave him a wide berth without realizing they were doing it. His reputation preceded him. The sports festival had been broadcast nationally, and his name carried weight now. Midoriya. Uraraka fell into step beside him. Her her exam uniform fitting her frame with a confidence she'd built over months of training. "You look like you're about to enjoy this way too much." "I'm about to enjoy this exactly the right amount," Izuku said, grinning down at her. She'd grown since April, stronger, faster, and her quirk control had improved to the point where she could float objects with pinpoint accuracy at range. He was proud of her in a way that sat warm in his chest. "You ready?" "Ready to pass." She cracked her knuckles. "And maybe show off a little. That's my girl." Uraraka's face flushed pink, but she was smiling. She'd stopped pretending the warmth between them was just friendship about a month ago, though neither of them had put words to it yet. The thing growing between them was still new, still finding its shape, and they were both content to let it unfold at its own pace. The first phase of the exam was a free-for-all elimination. Hit 3 targets on your opponent's body with special balls, and you pass. Get 3 of your targets hit, and you're out. Simple rules, brutal execution, especially when 1,500 people were trying to eliminate each other simultaneously. The starting buzzer sounded, and the arena devolved into chaos. Izuku moved through it like a blade through water. His observation haki painted the battlefield in perfect clarity. Every combatant's position, every incoming attack, every alliance forming and breaking in real time. He dodged projectiles without looking at them, sidestepped ambushes before they triggered, and picked off opponents with a casual efficiency that bordered on insulting. He threw the balls underhanded, overhand, behind his back, off walls at angles that shouldn't have worked. Every throw hit its mark because he could feel exactly where his targets would be by the time the ball arrived. Observation Haki turned trajectory into instinct, and instinct into certainty. 12 down, Izuku muttered to himself, catching a ball that an enemy student had thrown at his back without even turning around. He flicked it backward over his shoulder and felt the impact register on the student's forehead through his haki. 13. A group from Shiketsu had organized a coordinated assault. 8 students moving in a pincer formation, trying to overwhelm him with numbers. Their leader, a boy whose quirk turned his skin into hardened clay armor, shouted commands with military precision. Izuku let them close in. When they were 15 meters away on all sides, he planted his feet and released a pulse of Conqueror's haki. Light, focused. Nothing like the bomb he'd dropped at USJ. This was a scalpel rather than a warhammer. The wave of pressure hit the 8 Shiketsu students like a gust of impossible wind, and their legs buckled. 3 dropped their balls. 2 fell to one knee. The remaining 3 staggered. Their coordination shattered in an instant. Izuku threw 5 balls in a 2-second burst. Each one hit a target. 5 more students eliminated. 18. He found Uraraka 3 minutes later, fighting a pair of Ketsubutsu students in a narrow alley between 2 concrete structures. She had one of them floating helplessly 10 meters in the air, while she engaged the second at close range, dodging a stretchy-armed quirk user's extending punches with the footwork Izuku had drilled into her over countless rooftop training sessions. Izuku watched from a rooftop above, arms crossed, grinning. She feinted left, ducked under a punch that stretched 3 meters toward her face, and slapped her palm against the student's extended arm. Zero gravity activated instantly, and the student's own momentum carried him spinning upward into the air, weightless and flailing. Uraraka tagged both floating students with balls while they hung helpless above her, then released her quirk and let them drop, catching them with a float activation at the last second so they landed softly. "That's my 100, she announced, pumping her fist. Izuku laughed from above. "Beautiful. That footwork was perfect." She looked up at him with flushed cheeks and a victorious smile that made his heart do something it rarely did. Skip. They both passed the first phase inside the first 15 minutes. When they regrouped with the rest of Class 1A at the staging area, they found that all 20 of Aizawa's students had cleared it, a record for any single class in the exam's history. The second phase was the rescue exercise, a simulated disaster scenario, collapsed buildings, trapped civilians, played by professional actors from the Help Us company, fires, flooding, and a time limit that demanded both speed and prioritization. The examinees deployed in waves. Izuku's wave included Uraraka, Ida, and Todoroki from his class, alongside students from 5 other schools. The mock disaster zone was 3 city blocks of pre-demolished buildings, filled with screaming actors buried under rubble, hanging from unstable structures, and trapped behind walls of debris. Most students scrambled to find and rescue as many people as possible. It was, on paper, a pure rescue scenario with 0 combat application. Then the ambush triggered. Halfway through the exercise, villains appeared. Professional fighters hired by the exam commission, wearing combat gear, wielding suppression tools, and moving with the speed and coordination of actual pros. Their job was to disrupt the rescue efforts, threaten the civilians, and test whether the examinees could fight and save at the same time. 3 of them converged on Izuku's sector. The first one came from above, dropping from a half-collapsed building with a suppression baton aimed at Izuku's skull. Observation Haki felt him falling before he'd even cleared the rooftop edge. Izuku sidestepped the landing strike, caught the man's wrist, and redirected his momentum into the concrete wall beside them. The impact cracked the masonry and the examiner's baton shattered. The second came from behind, rushing in while the first attacked, a pincer maneuver. Izuku released the first examiner, pivoted and met the second with an open palm coated in Armament Haki, pressed flat against his chest. He pushed a single, controlled shove that sent the examiner sliding backward on his heels for 10 meters without injury, but with absolute certainty that he was outclassed. The third was smarter. She held back, assessed, and raised a capture net launcher aimed at the civilians Izuku was protecting. A test of prioritization. Save people or fight the villain. Izuku drew ace. The blade came free and left his hand in a single motion. Thrown like a javelin, spinning end over end, the black coating catching the dusty air. It covered 30 meters in a heartbeat and severed the capture net in mid-flight before embedding itself in the wall behind the examiner with a thunk that echoed through the street. The examiner looked at the sword buried 2 inches from her head. Then she looked at Izuku, who was already carrying 2 civilians on his shoulders and jogging toward the extraction zone. "I'm going to mark you as a pass," she said to herself, very quietly. Izuku retrieved Ace from the wall on his way back and sheathed it one-handed while setting down a crying actor who was supposed to be an injured child. He knelt beside the child, checked their injuries with a gentle efficiency that surprised the nearby examinees, and gave them a reassuring grin. "You're safe now. I've got you." The actor, a professional who had played scared civilians in 15 previous exams, later told colleagues that it was the first time in her career she'd genuinely forgotten she was acting. Something in that boy's voice made you believe, down to your bones, that you were safe. Uraraka worked the rescue zone beside him like they'd been partnering for years. She floated debris off trapped victims while Izuku pulled them free. She created clear paths by removing rubble while Izuku carried 3 people at once. They moved in sync, her eyes finding the next victim, his observation haki confirming the path was safe, both of them flowing through the disaster zone like they were reading each other's minds. "Left," Uraraka called. Izuku was already turning. He caught a falling beam with one haki-coated hand before it crushed a civilian pinned beneath a car, held it above his head with 0 visible effort, and grinned. "Got it! Pull them out!" Uraraka dove under the beam, grabbed the actor's shoulders, and dragged them clear. She slapped them weightless, pushed them toward the extraction zone, and released the float so they landed gently in the safe area. "Nice!" Izuku tossed the beam aside like cardboard and was already running to the next victim. By the time the exercise timer expired, Izuku had rescued 27 civilians and neutralized all 3 villains in his sector. Uraraka had rescued 19. Combined, their sector had the fastest clearance time and the highest rescue count of any pair in the exam. The results came 4 days later. All 20 members of Class 1A passed. Izuku's individual score was the highest of all 1,500 examinees, a first in the exam's history. He pinned the provisional license to the inside of Ace's sheath, where it rested against the blade's guard. "You put your hero license inside your sword's sheath," Aizawa said when he found out, his voice flat as a dead sea. "Why?" "Keeps it close to what matters," Izuku said, grinning. "The license means I get to fight. The sword is how I fight. They belong together." Aizawa stared at him for a full 5 seconds, sighed, and walked away. The summer training camp was supposed to be a crucible, a chance for Class 1A and Class 1B to push beyond their limits in the wilderness, supervised by the wild, wild pussycats. The mountain air was clean, the forest was dense, and the facilities were bare bones in that way that built character through discomfort. Izuku loved it. The wilderness felt right to him in a way classrooms never did. Open sky, fresh wind, the smell of earth and pine, it resonated with something in his marrow. A life spent on the deck of a ship, breathing salt air, sleeping under stars. He woke every morning before dawn, ran the mountain trails with ace in his hand, and practiced his sword forms in the mist while the rest of the camp slept. On the third night, Uraraka found him there. She'd woken early too, restless, her body buzzing with that pre-dawn energy that demanded movement, and followed the sound of a blade cutting air to the clearing where Izuku trained. She watched him move for a full minute before he acknowledged her. His forms were beautiful, fluid, powerful, each swing flowing into the next with a grace that made the violence of it almost invisible. The blade traced arcs through the fog, and the air hissed with each pass. "You're up early," he said without turning around. "Observation." Haki made sneaking up on him impossible. Couldn't sleep. She sat on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing, pulling her jacket tight against the mountain chill. "You always train at this hour? Best time." He completed a final sequence. 3 slashes, a thrust, a pirouette into a downward cleave, and lowered ace, breathing easy. The world's honest before sunrise. Everything's stripped down to what it actually is. She tilted her head. "That's almost poetic for you." He laughed, that big booming sound that should have woken the whole camp, and dropped onto the log beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Don't tell anyone. I've got a reputation." They sat together in the growing light, watching the mist curl through the trees, and the comfortable warmth between them said more than conversation could. "Izuku," she said after a while, her voice soft against the dawn. "Yeah? After you graduate, after you become whatever you're going to become, what do you actually want?" He leaned back, looked up at the sky, turning from gray to pink, and his grin softened into something she rarely saw from him, genuine, unguarded reflection. "I want my people free," he said. "All of them. Free from fear, free from villains, free from the idea that they can't be more than what they are right now." He glanced at her. "I want a world where a kid can grow up without someone telling them they're worth less than somebody else. And I want to see it all. Every corner of this world, every challenge, every horizon." His grin came back, bright as the rising sun. "And I want good food and good company the whole way." Uraraka looked at him, the mist in his hair, the light catching his freckles, that impossible grin, and felt something in her chest settle into a shape she recognized. "That sounds like a good dream," she said. "Best dream there is." He bumped her shoulder with his. "You in?" Her smile was answer enough. The attack came on the 5th night. Izuku felt them before anyone else. A cluster of hostile presences, burning with killing intent, approaching from the eastern tree line. His Observation Haki had been running as ambient awareness since they'd arrived at camp, and the sudden spike of murderous will hit him like a flare in the dead of a moonless night. He was on his feet before the first cloud of purple gas touched the forest edge. "Everyone up." Izuku's voice cut through the camp like a cannon shot, loud enough to reach every cabin, every tent, every student still drowsing in their sleeping bags. "We're under attack, crew! On your feet now!" The camp erupted into chaos in seconds. The purple gas, Mustard's Quirk, a sleeping poison, was rolling through the eastern forest in a wall of violet mist. Students stumbled out of cabins coughing, eyes watering, some already dropping. The pussycats mobilized instantly, Mandalay's telepathy firing commands to every student in range. Izuku drew ace, coated the blade in Armament Haki, and swung toward the tree line in a massive horizontal arc. The flying slash tore through the gas cloud like a blade through silk, splitting it and dispersing the leading edge with raw air pressure. It bought the camp 30 seconds of clear air. Todoroki. Ice wall on the eastern perimeter. Seal the gas out. Izuku was already running. Ida. Get the unconscious students to the cabins. Uraraka. Float the heaviest sleepers if you have to. Kirishima. Bakugo. You're with me. He commanded. They obeyed. The strange thing was that nobody questioned it. There was something in his voice during crisis that bypassed doubt entirely and went straight to the hindbrain. the voice of a captain who had sailed worse storms than this. Todoroki slammed both hands to the earth, and a wall of ice erupted along the eastern tree line, 20 feet high, thick as castle masonry, sealing the gas behind a frozen barrier. Inside the wall, purple mist pressed and churned, cut off from the camp. Izuku plunged into the forest. He moved between the trees like a phantom, ace in hand, his observation haki painting the woods in perfect three-dimensional awareness. He could feel them. 6, 7, 8 distinct presences scattered through the forest. The Vanguard Action Squad. Villains sent to kill, to capture, to terrorize. The first one he found was muscular. The villain was enormous, a wall of artificial muscle fiber erupting from his skin, layers upon layers of synthetic power wrapped around a body that was already massive. He was in the process of tearing a tree out of the ground when Izuku emerged from the brush 20 meters ahead of him. Muscular grinned with all his teeth. "Oh, a kid. Let me guess. You're one of the hero brats from the camp?" "The one in charge," Izuku said, rolling his neck. "You're in my forest. That annoys me." "Your forest?" Muscular laughed, an ugly, grinding sound. "Kid, I'm going to pull your arms off and beat you with..." Izuku moved. He closed 20 meters in a single step. Haki reinforced speed that ate distance like a teleport. And Ace was already mid-swing when Muscular's eyes registered that the boy was gone from where he'd been standing. The blade hit Muscular's muscle-armored shoulder with the force of a demolition ball. Armament Haki turned the edge into something that didn't just cut. It dominated. The compressed layers of muscle fiber split like wet paper under the black-coated steel, and Ace buried itself 6 inches into the villain's body before Izuku wrenched it free in a spray of red. Muscular screamed. He swung blindly, a massive fist wrapped in layered muscle, fast and devastating, but Izuku was already beneath it, having ducked the swing before it started. Observation Haki made this man's attacks a joke. A slow, predictable, readable joke. Izuku drove his free fist into Muscular's exposed ribcage. Armament Haki coated his knuckles, and the impact cratered the villain's chest inward. Ribs shattered, 3, 4, 5 in sequence, and Muscular flew backward, crashing through 2 trees and a boulder before coming to rest in a heap of splintered wood and crushed stone. He tried to rise. Layers of muscle fiber regenerated over his wounds, patching the damage, building more armor. He was tough. Genuinely tough, built to take punishment that would kill anyone else. Izuku was already on him. Ace came down in a vertical slash coated in that crackling black lightning. Conqueror's Haki infusion, the same force that had killed the Nomu at USJ. The blade carved through Muscular's regenerating armor like it was air, splitting the layered defenses from shoulder to hip in a single, devastating line that went through physical protection the way a hurricane went through a paper wall. Muscular's eyes rolled back. His body hit the forest floor and stayed there, the muscle fibers deflating around him like a balloon with its air punched out. He twitched once, twice, and went still. 3 seconds. Start to finish. Izuku flicked the blood from Ace's edge and turned. He could feel the others through the forest. His classmates fighting, some struggling, some holding their own. Bakugo's explosive signature was burning bright to the north, locked in combat with someone fast. Kirishima was there too, his hardening quirk flaring in rhythmic pulses, and there, to the northwest, he felt something that made his blood boil. A presence, small, terrified, being dragged, one of his own. Izuku ran. He found them in a clearing half a kilometer from camp. Dabi stood at the center of it, blue flames licking his patchwork skin, and behind him, wrapped in a compressed villain's liquid body, unconscious and being pulled into a warp gate, was Fumikage Tokoyami. The bird-headed boy's shadow creature, Dark Shadow, was going berserk. Massive, feral, lost in the darkness of the forest night. But the compressed villain had neutralized Tokoyami's body before Dark Shadow could save its master. They were taking him. Izuku exploded out of the tree line. "Hands off my crew!" His Conqueror's Haki erupted in a targeted lance, focused entirely on the compressed villain and the warp gate's operator. The compressed villain staggered, his liquid form destabilizing for a critical second. The warp gate flickered and shrank, its edges wavering. Izuku was there. He slashed through the compressed villain's extended form, the Haki-coated blade disrupting the liquid body enough to loosen its grip on Tokoyami, and caught his unconscious classmate with his free arm. Dabi launched blue fire. A wave of it, searing, concentrated, hot enough to melt steel, aimed at Izuku's exposed back. Izuku coated his entire back in Armament Haki. The blue flames washed over the black sheen and dissipated like sparks against iron. The heat was real, intense, but Haki was stronger. Haki was always stronger. He set Tokoyami down behind a tree, sheathed Ace, and turned to face Dabi. "That fire's pretty," Izuku said, and his grin had an edge to it that made Dabi take a step back despite himself. "But you'll need way more than that to put a mark on me." Dabi's response was a wall of blue flame, ceiling to floor, stretching across the entire clearing. It was indiscriminate, furious, designed to destroy everything in its path. Izuku drew Ace and swung once. The flying slash cut through the fire, split it down the center like a curtain, and kept going. Dabi threw himself sideways, barely, just barely, and the crescent wave of black energy tore through the trees behind where he'd been standing, felling them in a cascading crash of timber. "Kurogiri," Dabi shouted, scrambling to his feet. "Get me out." A warp gate opened behind Dabi. He dove for it. Izuku could have stopped him. He could feel the trajectory, could have thrown Ace and pinned the villain before he reached the portal. But Tokoyami was behind him, unconscious and exposed, and two more hostile presences were converging on this clearing from the south. He let Dabi go. Protecting his crew came first. Always. The Vanguard Action Squad retreated 13 minutes after the assault began. They fled through warp gates and scattered into the night, carrying their wounded, Muscular's broken body, Mustard's unconscious form, taken down by Kendo and Tetsutetsu from Class 1B, and a handful of others who'd been overwhelmed by the camp's defenders. They left with nothing. In the original plan, they were supposed to capture Bakugo. In the original timeline, the one where Izuku Midoriya was a crying, anxious boy with borrowed power, they succeeded. Here, in this world where the Pirate King's soul burned in a teenager's body, they ran because Izuku Midoriya's crew was untouchable. The aftermath was ugly in a different way. Ragdoll of the Pussycats had been injured in the initial assault, her quirk stolen by All for One through a Nomu that escaped during the chaos. 13 students were hospitalized for gas inhalation. 3 had broken bones from fighting Moonfish before Tokoyami's unleashed dark shadow crushed the villain. Aizawa stood in the camp's wreckage the next morning, assessing damage. His face a mask of controlled fury. The League had attacked his students, had tried to kidnap one of them, had injured heroes under his care. He looked at Izuku, who was helping Kirishima carry supplies from a collapsed cabin, humming that same sea shanty, and felt something complex move through him. This boy had neutralized Muscular in seconds, had prevented Tokoyami's kidnapping, had organized the class defense in the critical first moments before the teachers could mobilize. He was 15 years old. "Midoriya," Aizawa said. Izuku looked up. A crate of first aid supplies balanced on one shoulder. "You did well last night." The words came out stiff, reluctant, like they were being pulled from him with pliers. "Your threat assessment and command decisions were effective." Izuku's grin was warm. "Thanks, Teach. Couldn't have done it without the crew." Aizawa's eye twitched. "Stop calling them that. They love it. They tolerate it. Same thing." Izuku winked and went back to carrying supplies. The fallout from the training camp attack reverberated through Hero Society like an earthquake. Public confidence in heroes dipped. Parents demanded answers. The media circled UA like sharks sensing blood. And underground, the League of Villains licked their wounds and planned something worse. 2 weeks after the attack, intelligence came through the Hero Network. The League had a new base, an abandoned warehouse district in Kamino Ward, and they were hoarding something, weapons, Nomu, or both. The raid was organized at the highest levels: All Might, Endeavor, Best Genist, Mount Lady, Edgeshot, Gran Torino, and a dozen other top heroes converging on Kamino in a coordinated strike. Students were explicitly, repeatedly, emphatically told to stay away. Izuku lasted about 4 hours before he decided to go anyway. "You're insane," Kirishima said, pulling on his shoes in the dormitory hallway. "Like, genuinely, medically, certifiably. You say that every week, because it's true every week." But Kirishima was grinning, sharp teeth flashing, because he was already ready to go. So was Todoroki. So was Ida, though his face said he hated himself for it. So was Uraraka, standing by the door with her costume case in hand and determination in her brown eyes. "We're not letting you go alone," she said, and her voice brokered zero argument. Izuku looked at his crew, Todoroki with his mismatched eyes burning with purpose, Ida standing rigid with his engine legs ready, Kirishima hardened and eager, Uraraka fierce and sure, and felt that old, familiar warmth in his chest. The warmth of a crew at your back, ready to sail into hell with you because they believed in where you were going. "Then let's go," Izuku said, and they moved. They arrived at Kamino's perimeter in time to see the raid go sideways. All Might was fighting. The sound of it was unlike anything Izuku had ever heard. Explosive impacts that shook the ground, shockwaves that turned buildings to rubble, the unmistakable roar of the world's strongest hero pushed to his absolute limit. And his opponent was worse. All for One stood in the wreckage like a living nightmare. Faceless, suited, radiating a power so vast that even from 3 blocks away, Izuku felt it pressing against his Observation Haki like a weight on his skull. This was the man behind everything. The man who had broken All Might's body decades ago. The puppet master. The ancient evil. "That's him," Izuku breathed, and for the first time in years, his grin didn't quite reach his eyes. His soul remembered power like this, the kind that reshuffled the world just by existing. "That's the real enemy." "Midoriya." Todoroki's voice was tight. "All Might is losing." He was right. Through the dust and distance, Izuku could see it. All Might's muscle form flickering, his body steaming, his blows landing with less force each time, while All for One absorbed and redirected and countered with an arsenal of stolen quirks. The symbol of peace was burning through his last reserves. "We need to get closer," Izuku said. "I can." "You are not fighting All for One," Ida said, grabbing his arm. "That is beyond." "I'm going to help," Izuku said, and his voice carried that weight, the one that ended arguments before they began. "But I need you 4 to do something for me first." He turned to them. His green eyes were blazing with that ancient fire, and his crew saw it. The king beneath the boy, the will that had once commanded an entire era. There are still villains in that warehouse complex. Small fry. Leftovers from the League that didn't evacuate. I can feel them through my haki, at least 30. He pointed east. The pro-heroes are all focused on All for One. Those villains are going to scatter into the city if nobody corrals them. I need you 4 to hold that line. "And you?" Uraraka asked. "I'm going to make sure All Might lives through this." He didn't wait for permission or protests. He was already gone, leaping from rooftop to rooftop, closing the distance to the battle. Ace drawn and singing in the wind, he arrived at the combat zone in time to see All Might take a hit that cratered him into the asphalt. The number 1 hero lay in a man-shaped crater, his muscle form gone, his true body exposed. Skeletal Toshinori Yagi, coughing blood, struggling to rise while cameras broadcast the truth to the world. All for One stood over him, one hand raised, a combination clutching, quirk building in his palm, air cannons, kinetic amplifiers, forced enhancement, all compressed into a killing blow aimed at the man who had been his eternal enemy. "The symbol of peace dies tonight," All for One said, his blank face somehow managing to convey satisfaction. "And with you dies the era of..." A flying slash hit All for One in the side. The crescent wave of Haki-infused air pressure slammed into the villain's ribcage with enough force to push him sideways, to interrupt, to buy time, to redirect that killing hand away from All Might's broken body. All for One skidded 3 meters, caught himself, and turned that featureless face toward the source of the attack. Izuku stood on the edge of a half-destroyed building 20 meters away. Ace on his shoulder, grin locked in place, and every camera in Kamino Ward pointed at him. "Oi, ugly," Izuku called down, his voice booming across the battlefield. "I know you're busy being dramatic, but I've got a problem with your plan." All for One tilted his head. The air around him rippled with power. So much power accumulated over centuries, enough to break reality if applied correctly. His attention shifting to Izuku was like staring into the eye of a hurricane. "A child," All for One said, and his voice was silk over steel. "One of the UA students, I presume? How bold, how foolish, how rude." Izuku twirled Ace once and dropped from the building, landing in the rubble between All for One and All Might's prone form. He planted himself there, feet wide, blade ready, his body a wall between the villain and the hero. "You don't get to finish him. He's retiring tonight, sure, but on his terms. On his feet." All for One was silent for a moment, Then something that might have been a laugh emerged from that absent face. "You think you can stop me, boy? You think your will, however impressive, means anything against centuries of accumulated power?" Izuku's haki surged. Conquerors rolling off him in waves visible to the cameras, visible to the world. Black lightning crackling at his feet, the air distorting around him, reality itself bending under the weight of his spirit. "Let's find out," Izuku said. All for One raised his hand. Air cannons fired. A concentrated blast of compressed atmosphere with enough force to level a city block. It screamed toward Izuku at the speed of sound. Izuku swung ace. Divine departure erupted from the blade, that black and red crescent of Conqueror's coded force, and met the air cannon blast head-on. The collision detonated in midair, producing a shockwave that shattered every window within a quarter mile and sent debris spiraling outward in all directions. Through the smoke, Izuku was still standing. His uniform was torn, his hair blown wild, but his grin was intact and his blade was ready. "That all?" he said, and his voice carried. All for One was already moving, launching another combination attack, this one laced with a strength-enhancing quirk and a telekinetic force multiplier. A wall of invisible power rushed forward like a battering ram. Izuku coated his entire body in Armament Haki, full body coverage. Every inch of skin turned obsidian hard, and took the hit on his chest. It pushed him back, 10 feet, 20, his boots digging trenches in the rubble. But he stayed upright. Stayed standing. The force dissipated against his haki like a wave against a cliff face. Behind him, All Might stirred. The skeleton thin man pushed himself up on shaking arms, watching through blood-tinged vision as a 15-year-old boy stood against the strongest villain in history and refused to fall. Young Midoriya. All Might whispered. "Get up, old man." Izuku shouted over his shoulder without looking back. "I'm buying you 30 seconds. Make them count." All Might stared at that back, broad, black-coated, unbending, and felt something ignite in his dying embers. The boy was right. He had one punch left, maybe two. And a symbol of peace didn't die lying down. Toshinori forced the transformation. Muscle bloomed over bone one final time. Painful, straining, the last dregs of One for All burning like a candle at both ends. He rose, he stood, he clenched his fist. Izuku felt it. Through his haki, he felt All Might's power surge behind him. A final, desperate blaze of strength, one last punch to give. Now, Izuku launched himself sideways, clearing All Might's path, and at the same moment released a massive pulse of Conqueror's haki aimed directly at All for One. A hammer of will meant to stagger, to distract, to create a single opening. All for One flinched, just for a heartbeat. The Conqueror's haki washed over him and his movements stuttered, his guard dropping by inches, his head turning toward the source of that impossible pressure. All Might moved. United States of Smash. The punch connected. All of One for All, concentrated into a single point, delivered with every remaining ounce of Toshinori Yagi's indomitable spirit. It hit All for One in the center of his faceless head, and the impact produced a pillar of force that shot straight up into the sky, parting clouds, splitting the night. All for One crashed into the earth. The ground cratered beneath him, 10 meters, 20. A hole so deep and so violent that the surrounding buildings tilted inward from the displacement. When the dust cleared, the ancient villain lay at the bottom of a 30-meter crater, unmoving. All Might raised his fist to the sky. His muscle form was already gone, deflating, thinning, leaving behind the broken frame of Toshinori Yagi. But his fist stayed up. The cameras caught it. The world saw it. The symbol of peace's final act. Izuku sheathed ace and walked to All Might's side. The old hero was swaying, barely conscious, his body finally giving up after burning its last reserves. Izuku caught him before he fell, one arm supporting the skeletal frame that had once carried the world's hope. "You did it, old man," Izuku said, grinning despite the exhaustion, despite the bruises, despite everything. Hell of a final punch. All Might looked at him through dimming eyes. You stood against him. For me. That's what the younger generation does. Izuku helped him sit against a piece of rubble, gentle despite his strength. We carry what you built, and we build higher. Toshinori's eyes filled with tears. His hand found Izuku's shoulder and squeezed with what little strength remained. "The future," All Might whispered, "is in excellent hands." Then the cameras arrived, and the paramedics, and the chaos of aftermath. But for one moment, one frozen, perfect moment, It was just the boy with the sword and the man who had been the world's greatest hero, sitting together in the rubble of the old era, both knowing that the new one had already begun. The months that followed were a reshaping. All Might retired. Hero Society adjusted, leaned on its remaining pillars, and tried to project strength it wasn't sure it still had. The students of UA moved into dormitories for their safety. The world kept spinning, faster and more uncertain than before. Izuku trained harder. He trained like something was coming, because he could feel it. Through his Observation Haki, through the whispers of his soul, through an instinct older than language. All for One was in prison, but he was alive. The head had been cut, but the body still thrashed. Shigaraki was out there, the League was out there, and the power vacuum left by All Might's retirement was a wound the world hadn't begun to heal. The Shi Hasaikai came next. Izuku first heard the name from Sir Night-Eye, All Might's former sidekick, a man with a face like carved stone and a quirk that let him see the future. Their meeting was arranged by Aizawa, who had decided that if his most dangerous student was going to keep inserting himself into high-level conflicts regardless of permission, he might as well be pointed at the right targets. Night-Eye's office was austere and organized. The man himself studied Izuku with eyes that missed nothing. The sword on his back, the lazy confidence in his posture, the invisible weight that pressed against Night-Eye's own awareness like standing in deep water. "You're the boy who stood against All for One," Night-Eye said, no warmth in his voice. Stood against, distracted, and set up the winning blow. Izuku leaned back in his chair. "But sure, let's go with yours." "Don't mistake my interest for approval." Night-Eye's glasses reflected the overhead light. "You're reckless. You operate without authorization. You have no respect for the chain of... I respect results." Izuku's grin was pleasant, but his eyes were sharp. "So tell me about the Shi Hasaikai." Night-Eye's jaw tightened. Then he opened a file. The Shi Hasaikai was a Yakuza organization. Old money, old blood, declining in the post-Quirk era, but clinging to relevance through one man's ambition. Kai Chisaki. Overhaul. A quirk that let him disassemble and reassemble anything he touched. Matter, biology, people. He could destroy and recreate at the molecular level with a single hand, and he was using a child to do it. Night-Eye laid out the evidence. A girl, 6 years old, Eri. Eri. Her quirk produced a substance that could rewind a person's body, erase mutations, erase quirks, rewind them to a previous state. Overhaul was harvesting her blood, processing it into bullets capable of destroying quirks permanently and selling them on the black market. He was hurting her, breaking her apart and putting her back together, over and over and over and over. The room went cold. Izuku's grin was gone. In its place was something that none of his classmates had ever seen. Something ancient and furious that made the air pressure in Night-Eye's office spike to a level that cracked the reinforced window behind his desk. "Where is she?" Izuku said, and his voice was low and steady in a way that was more frightening than any shout could have been. Night-Eye felt sweat break on his forehead. The boy's presence, that crushing, dominating will, was pressing against him like a weight on his chest. He couldn't breathe properly. His body wanted to prostrate itself, to yield, to acknowledge the authority in that voice. "We don't have the exact location yet," Night-Eye managed. "We're working on..." "Then work faster." Izuku stood. Ace's weight shifted on his back. "Every day you spend gathering intelligence is a day that girl suffers. I'll give you 2 weeks, then I'm going in regardless. You can't just..." 2 weeks, Night-Eye. Izuku was at the door. "Use them well." He left the office and Night-Eye sat in the residual pressure of that presence for a full minute before his breathing returned to baseline. His hands were shaking. This boy, Night-Eye thought, this boy is going to reshape the world whether we're ready for it or not. The operation launched 11 days later. A joint raid between Night-Eye's agency, Fat Gum's agency, Ryukyu's agency, and a hand-picked team of UA students, including Izuku, Uraraka, Kirishima, and Ida from Class 1A. The target was the Shi Hasaikai compound, an underground labyrinth beneath an old Yakuza estate, warded and guarded and built to keep secrets buried. The raid team breached the surface entrance at dawn. 20 heroes, 10 sidekicks, and 4 students poured into the compound in coordinated waves, each team assigned a specific target within the underground maze. Izuku's team went deep. They pushed through the labyrinth, fighting through Hasaikai foot soldiers, mimics terrain reshaping attempts, and a gauntlet of increasingly dangerous lieutenants. Suneater handled one. Fat Gum absorbed another's attacks until his fat burned away and his one devastating counterpunch ended the fight. Red Riot, Kirishima in his work-study costume, broke through a wall and a villain simultaneously, his unbreakable form shrugging off blows that should have shattered bone. Izuku cut through his share, but he was moving fast, too fast for his team to keep up. His Observation Haki was locked on one signal, a small, terrified presence deep below them. A child's heartbeat, rapid with fear, crying out in a silence that only he could hear. Izuku, Uraraka called from behind. Wait, there's still enemies between us and... Handle them. He was already through the next doorway, Ace singing as it opened a path through the stone corridor ahead. I'm going to get her. He went alone. The lower levels of the compound were different, cleaner, whiter, more sterile, laboratory adjacent, medical in a way that made Izuku's skin crawl and his grip tighten on Ace until the leather wrapping creaked. This was where Chisaki worked, where he took a little girl apart and rebuilt her like a puzzle box. Izuku found the room. He kicked the reinforced door off its hinges and strode inside, and what he saw branded itself into his memory with the permanence of a scar. Eri was on a table. Small. So small. So impossibly tiny, with white hair and a single horn on her forehead, and bandages wrapping arms that shouldn't need wrapping on a 6-year-old child. She was crying. Her red eyes were open and terrified and looking at the door, at him, with an expression that broke his heart in a way nothing else in this life ever had. And standing over her, hands reaching down, gloved fingers flexing, was Kai Chisaki. Overhaul turned. His golden eyes were flat behind the plague mask. His hands, those terrible reconstructing hands, hung at his sides like loaded weapons. A hero, Chisaki said, his voice smooth and empty. You shouldn't be here. This is family business. Izuku's response was a swing of Ace. The Haki-coated blade covered the 10-meter gap between them in a heartbeat. A flying slash aimed at Chisaki's hands, specifically his hands, because those hands had touched this child. Had hurt this child. Had broken and rebuilt this child like she was raw material of a person. Chisaki pressed his palm to the floor. The room exploded upward. Tiles, concrete, rebar, all disassembling and reassembling into a wall of reconstructed stone that blocked the flying slash. The impact cratered the barrier and sent fracture lines racing through it, but it held. Impressive. Chisaki's voice was unchanged, that same empty calm. But pointless. I can rebuild faster than you can destroy. Izuku was already moving. He vaulted the barrier before it could reform. Ace leveled at Chisaki's chest, his body a missile of black-coated fury. Chisaki touched the ground again and a column of stone erupted from below, aimed at Izuku's torso, designed to skewer him in midair. Izuku cut through it. One swing, one line of black energy, and the column split and fell away in 2 halves. He landed on Chisaki's side of the barrier and swung again. A vicious horizontal arc aimed at the villain's midsection. Chisaki leaped back. His hands pressed against the wall, reassembling it into a series of spike-tipped arms that lashed at Izuku from all angles. 5, 10, 15 stone appendages striking simultaneously like the tentacles of some underground beast. Izuku's eyes flashed. Observation Haki tracked every trajectory, every angle, every speed. He moved through the forest of stone arms like he was dancing, ducking, weaving, his blade catching and destroying each appendage as it reached him. Stone shattered against Haki-coated steel and fell as dust. You're fast, Chisaki observed, already reassembling the room's floor into something new. A cage this time, walls rising around Izuku's position. But you're in my territory. Every surface here is my weapon. Then I'll break every surface, Izuku said, and his grin came back. The manic, furious, hungry grin of a man who had just found something worth breaking. Divine departure. He swung Ace overhead and the crescent wave of Conqueror's infused force erupted outward in all directions, a 360-degree explosion of will that tore through walls, ceiling, floor, and every reconstructed surface Chisaki had built. The entire room blew outward. The laboratory collapsed. The level above groaned and cracked. When the dust cleared, they stood in a crater that had been a room. Rubble surrounding them in a perfect circle of destruction, the underground compound ripped open to the level above. Chisaki was bleeding from a cut on his forehead where debris had caught him. His mask was cracked, and Eri was behind Izuku. Somehow, in the microsecond between Izuku's attack and the explosion, he had crossed the room, scooped her off the table, and shielded her body with his own. His back was peppered with concrete fragments embedded in his coat, but the girl in his arm was unharmed. Eri stared up at him with enormous red eyes, tears still streaming, her small body trembling against his chest. "Hey," Izuku said to her, and his voice was gentler than anyone knew would have believed possible, warm as sunlight on water. "I've got you. You're safe now. But overhaul Will." Her voice was tiny, broken, terrified. "He won't touch you again." Izuku set her down behind a piece of fallen wall and stood up, rolling his shoulders. He looked at Chisaki across the crater, and his gentle expression evaporated. What replaced it was something that belonged to a man passing a death sentence. "Here's what's going to happen, Chisaki." Izuku's voice was iron. "I'm going to break you. I'm going to break you so completely that you'll never reconstruct yourself from it. And then this girl is going to walk out of here free, and you're going to rot in a cell for the rest of your miserable life." Chisaki ripped off his cracked mask. His face beneath was young, almost handsome, twisted with disgust and fury. He pressed both hands to the rubble, and the underground erupted. The villain fused with the debris around him, absorbing stone, steel, concrete into his own body, growing, expanding, becoming something monstrous. He'd done this before. Izuku could feel the practiced efficiency of it through Observation Haki, but never at this scale. Chisaki rose to 15 feet, then 20, his body a chimera of reconstructed matter and flesh, his forearms ending in hands the size of cars. "I am rebuilding this rotting world," Chisaki roared, his voice distorted by size and mass. "I am curing the disease of quirks, and you, some child with a sword, think you can stop Emi?" Izuku looked up at the massive form towering above him. He should have felt small. He should have felt afraid. He felt excited. "You know what I see when I look at you?" Izuku said, raising Ace. The blade went black, then blacker. The Conqueror's lightning crackled along the edge, denser than ever before, compressed and focused until the air itself screamed around the sword. I see a man so afraid of the world that he has to break a little girl to feel powerful. And there is nothing in this universe I hate more than that." He didn't use divine departure, he used something new. Every ounce of Haki in his body, armament, observation conquerors, fused into a single point. His blade, his will, his rage for this child and every child like her, every person broken by someone stronger who chose cruelty over kindness. It compressed, condensed, became a singularity of power focused on the very tip of Ace's edge. Izuku raised the sword above his head, and the entire underground complex trembled. "Roger's decree!" He brought the blade down. The attack wasn't a flying slash. It wasn't a wave. It was a pillar, a vertical column of concentrated Haki that erupted from Ace's edge and drove straight down through Chisaki's monstrous form like a nail through rotten wood. It split him. From crown to floor, the condensed will of the Pirate King carved through reconstructed flesh and stolen matter and quirk-enhanced physiology like it was all the same. Nothing. Chisaki's massive form separated. The two halves fell in opposite directions, shedding debris and dissolving as the reconstruction lost coherence. The stolen mass crumbled away, stone returning to stone, steel to steel, until only Chisaki's original body remained, lying on the crater floor in a pool of his own blood, his arms splayed at wrong angles, his spine compressed by an impact that went beyond physical damage. He was alive. He would live. But every bone from his skull to his toes was fractured, and his hands, those terrible rebuilding hands, had been severed at the wrist by the precision of the final cut. They lay on the rubble 3 feet from his body, twitching with the last impulses of a quirk that could no longer reach its master. Izuku stood over him, chest heaving, Ace dripping. His grin was gone. In its place was something cold and final. "You'll never touch her again," Izuku said. "You'll never touch anyone again." Behind him, a tiny sound. He turned. Eri was still behind that piece of wall, her red eyes peeking over the top, wide as moons. She'd seen the whole thing. She was shaking. Izuku's expression transformed in an instant. The cold fury melting away, replaced by that warmth, that impossible gentleness that lived at the core of a man who laughed in the face of death. He sheathed Ace, crouched down to her eye level, and opened his arms. "Hey," he said, "it's over. He can't hurt you anymore. I promise." Eri stared at him. This boy, this person who had just destroyed the monster that had haunted her entire short life, was smiling at her. And it was a real smile, and his arms were open. And nobody had held her in so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like. She ran to him. Her tiny body slammed into his chest, and her arms wrapped around his neck, and she cried, screamed, sobbed, wailed with the full force of 6 years of agony, finally finding an outlet. She cried so hard she couldn't breathe, so hard her horn glowed, so hard that the quirk in her blood activated and power leaked from her skin. Izuku felt it. The rewinding. Her quirk was trying to undo him, to rewind his cells, his body, his existence backward through time. It burned like acid, like being unmade, and he could feel himself starting to unravel at the edges. He held on tighter, he poured Armament Haki into his body. Every cell, every molecule, coated in that indomitable will, and fought the rewinding to a standstill. His Haki pushed back against the quirk, his spirit refusing to be erased, his existence asserting itself against the forces trying to undo it. For 30 seconds, it was a war between a child's uncontrolled power and a king's unbreakable will. Izuku won. Eri's horn dimmed, her quirk settled, the rewinding faded, and she kept crying, kept holding on, kept burying her face in his shoulder because she was safe. She was safe, and she knew it. "I've got you," Izuku said, one hand on her back, his voice steady despite the residual burn in his cells. "I've got you, kid. You're crew now, and I take care of my crew." The rescue team found them like that. Izuku kneeling in the rubble of the collapsed laboratory, Eri asleep against his chest, her tiny fist curled in his shirt like she'd never let go. Around them, the wreckage of Overhaul's ambition. Behind them, the handless body of a man who had chosen cruelty and paid its full price. Night Eye stood at the edge of the crater, staring down at the scene and the future he'd been so certain about. The unchangeable, predetermined future his quirk showed him felt less like destiny and more like a suggestion. This boy changed fate itself. Eri came to live at UA. She stayed in the faculty wing at first, supervised, treated, given a room with soft things and warm colors and people who smiled at her without wanting something in return. Aizawa took primary guardianship because beneath the exhaustion and cynicism was a man who would walk through fire for a child in need. But she gravitated to Izuku. Every day, without fail, she found her way to wherever he was. If he was in the common room, she sat beside him. If he was training, she watched from the bleachers. If he was eating in the cafeteria, she appeared at his elbow with her own tray and said nothing, just sat and existed in his orbit like a satellite that had found its sun. Izuku treated her the way he treated everything precious to him. With a warmth so genuine, it was almost aggressive. He brought her candy apples from the convenience store. He told her stories about the sea, stories he shouldn't have known about islands in the sky and fishmen who lived beneath the waves, and a treasure at the end of the world that everyone was looking for. He let her ride on his shoulders and laughed when she grabbed his hair for balance. One evening, 3 weeks after the raid, Izuku was sitting on the dorm roof with Ace across his knees, watching the sunset turn the sky orange and gold. Eri appeared beside him, small, silent, her white hair blowing in the breeze. "Can I sit?" she asked, her voice still small, still careful. "Always." She sat beside him, her legs dangling over the roof's edge, tiny sneakers kicking the air, but they watched the sunset together for a while. "Izuku?" she said eventually. "Yeah? Are you going to leave?" Like everyone else? He looked at her. Her red eyes were steady, trying to be brave, but beneath them was a terror older than a child should carry. The terror of abandonment, of being left behind, of finding something good and having it taken away. "Hey." He reached over and ruffled her hair, gentle as a breeze. "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to remember it forever, okay?" She nodded. "I'm going to be right here." He tapped his chest. "Right here in this world, fighting for you until I'm old and gray and can't swing a sword anymore. And even then, I'll just switch to punching." He grinned at her. "You're my crew, Eri, and I've never abandoned a crewmate. Ever. In any lifetime." She blinked, her lower lip trembled, and then a smile, a real genuine 8-year-old smile, broke across her face like sunlight through clouds. "Okay," she said, "I believe you." Izuku's heart swelled with something so big it pressed against his ribs. "Yeah, The voice in his soul whispered, "This is what I sailed for. Not the treasure, not the glory. This. The people. Always the people." The school festival came in late autumn, and it came with the specific instruction from Principal Nezu that this event was for joy. Explicitly, unambiguously, joy. After the villains and the raids and the war that was building on the horizon, the students of UA needed something to remind them why they were here. Class 1A decided to put on a concert. It was Jiro's idea, born from her quirk and her love of music, and the class latched onto it with an enthusiasm that surprised even themselves. Drums, bass, keyboards, guitar. A full band setup with a performance that would fill the gymnasium with sound and energy, and the kind of reckless teenage happiness that made you forget the rest of the world for an hour. Izuku volunteered to sing. "You can sing?" Jiro asked, skeptical. Izuku threw his head back and belted 3 bars of an old pirate drinking song in a voice that rattled the classroom windows. It was rough, loud, wild, and so full of personality that the entire class stopped what they were doing to stare. "I'll take that as a yes," Jiro said, her ears ringing. They rehearsed every evening for 3 weeks. Izuku brought a chaotic energy to the practice sessions that drove Jiro half insane and made everyone else laugh. He improvised lyrics, added harmonies that shouldn't have worked but somehow did, and turned every rehearsal into a barely controlled party. The festival itself was a revelation. UA's campus transformed into a wonderland of student-run exhibits, food stalls, game booths, and performance stages. The general studies kids ran haunted houses and science demos. The support course showcased inventions that ranged from brilliant to explosive. And Class 1A's concert turned the gymnasium into something electric. Izuku stood at the center of the stage with a microphone in his hand, wearing his uniform shirt open over a black tank top, looking like the lead singer of a band that had sold out stadiums. When the music hit, Jiro's electric guitar ripping through the opening riff, Bakugo's drums crashing in behind it. Because, of course, Bakugo played drums, he played them like he was trying to murder them. Izuku grinned at the crowd and sang. He sang about freedom, about the open road and the horizon you'd never reach and the joy of chasing it anyway. About standing with people you loved against everything the world threw at you. He sang with his whole chest, his whole body, throwing himself into the music with the same abandon he threw himself into battle. The gymnasium went wild. Students danced, jumped, screamed. Even the general studies kids, the ones who resented the hero course, who felt overlooked and undervalued, were on their feet, caught in the gravitational pull of Izuku Midoriya being wholly, unapologetically alive. In the crowd, Eri sat on Mirio Togata's shoulders. The 3rd year had become a surrogate big brother to her in recent weeks, and her face was lit with wonder. She was smiling, really smiling, the kind of smile that used her whole face. And when Izuku pointed at her from the stage and winked, she laughed. It was the first time anyone had heard her laugh. After the concert, after the crowd dispersed and the equipment was packed away, Izuku found Uraraka at one of the outdoor food stalls. She was sitting alone on a bench, a half-eaten crepe in her hand, watching the festival lights blink across the campus with a contentment that radiated from her like warmth from a hearth. He sat beside her. "Hey." She smiled at him. That smile, the one that was just for him, the one that made his world tilt sideways. That was amazing, the concert. It was, right? He leaned back, stretching his arms along the bench back. Jiro's going to be a star if she wants it. And Bakugo on drums, I thought he was going to break through the stage. He was definitely trying. She took another bite of crepe and offered him a piece. He took it. Their fingers brushed, the festival lights painted everything in soft gold. Somewhere behind them, music from another class's performance drifted on the night air. The autumn breeze carried the smell of fried food and the distant sound of laughter. "Izuku," Uraraka said, and her voice was different now, softer, lower, carrying the weight of something she'd been holding for months. He turned to look at her. She was already looking at him, her brown eyes steady and warm and serious. "I'm going to say something," she said, "and I need you to just let me say it. Okay? Okay?" She set her crepe down. She turned to face him fully, her knees touching his on the bench, her hands finding her own lap, and then abandoning it, and then finding her lap again, nervous energy betraying the steadiness in her voice. "I love you," she said. "I have for a while now. And I know that sounds heavy, and I know we're 16 and there's a lot happening and the world is kind of falling apart around us, but I love you. The way you laugh, the way you protect people, the way you look at the world like it's the greatest adventure anyone's ever had, the way you made Eri smile today, the way you made Emi smile the first day we met, when you winked at me like the whole universe was a joke, only you understood. She paused, breathed. Her cheeks were flushed, but her eyes held steady on his. I love every part of it, she said, and I didn't want to wait anymore to tell you. Izuku stared at her. For once in his life, for maybe the first time since he was 4 years old in a doctor's office, he was speechless. The boy with a mouth too big and a laugh too loud and a confidence that could fill stadiums sat in absolute, overwhelmed silence. Then his grin broke through. That impossible, radiant, sunrise over the ocean grin. Ochako, he said, and his voice was thick with something he couldn't name but felt in every cell of his body. I've sailed, I've lived, I've fought for a lot of things. Freedom, adventure, my crew. He reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused from years of gripping a sword and infinitely gentle. But you're the treasure I didn't know I was looking for, and I'm not letting go. Her eyes went wide. Then they filled with tears. Then she was laughing, that bright, bubbling laugh that he loved more than music, and crying at the same time. And he pulled her into his chest and held her there, one arm around her shoulders, his chin resting on her hair. I love you too, he said against the top of her head. I love you, and I'm keeping you forever. She laughed into his shirt. That's very you. Would you want anything less? Never. He kissed her forehead, then her temple. Then, when she pulled back and looked up at him with those tear-bright eyes and that smile that undid him completely, he kissed her for real. The festival lights glittered around them. The music drifted and faded, and for one perfect golden moment, the Pirate King's reincarnation forgot about wars and villains and the weight of the world, and was just a boy, 16 and in love, kissing a girl who'd chosen him right back. They stayed on that bench until the festival shut down for the night, talking and laughing and holding hands and stealing kisses, and when they finally walked back to the dorms together, fingers interlaced, Kirishima wolf whistled from the common room window, and Izuku responded with a one-fingered salute that made Uraraka snort laugh so hard she doubled over. It was the best night of his life. And he'd lived 2 of them. The weeks after the festival turned darker. Reports came in from the intelligence agencies, movements, alliances, a growing army amassing under a banner that called itself the Meta Liberation Army. Their leader, Redestro, was a CEO on the surface and a revolutionary underneath, commanding tens of thousands of believers who wanted quirks freed from all regulation. They allied with the League of Villains. The fusion was a nightmare. Shigaraki's chaotic destruction married to Redestro's organizational infrastructure, 100,000 soldiers, funding, political connections, and at the head of it all, a Shigaraki Tamura who had grown more powerful since USJ, his decay quirk evolving, his body strengthening, his hatred sharpening into something that looked more and more like purpose. The heroes moved to counter it. A coalition formed, the top 50 hero agencies coordinating with police, military, and intelligence services. UA's third-year students were deployed alongside pros, and Class 1A, now second years, now licensed, now battle-tested, were assigned to the task force's secondary operations. Izuku's assignment put him on a team headed toward Redestro's main force. They found them in a ruined city, Deku, a former liberation stronghold, now a staging ground for an army that stretched from horizon to horizon. Redestro himself waited in the city center, his stress quirk turning emotional pressure into physical power, his body wreathed in an aura of compressed force that made the buildings around him groan. The hero coalition struck from 3 directions. Chaos erupted across Deku in waves of quirks and quirk-enhanced combat, pros clashing with liberation soldiers in streets and alleyways and rooftops. It was war, the first real, open battlefield war Japan's hero society had ever fought. Izuku carved through the liberation soldiers like a ship through waves. Each swing of ace felled 3, 4, 5 at a time, the Haki-coated blade creating flying slashes that sent whole squads tumbling, and the targeted pulses of Conqueror's Haki dropping anyone whose will buckled under the weight of a king's spirit. But he was aiming deeper, Past the soldiers, past the lieutenants, past the mid-tier commanders who thought their dedication to the cause made them strong. He was heading for Redestro himself. He found him in the city's central plaza, a massive space surrounded by half-demolished buildings, lit by fires and the pink glow of Redestro's stress aura. The man was enormous. 8 feet tall, his body swollen with stored power, his skin cracked and luminescent with compressed force. A student? Redestro's voice boomed, his red suit straining against his expanded form. They send children against me? Izuku walked into the plaza, ace on his shoulder, surrounded by the unconscious bodies of soldiers he dropped with Conqueror's Haki on his way in. His uniform was torn and dusty, but he was unmarked, unhurt, grinning. They didn't send me anywhere, Izuku said. I picked you. Redestro's stress aura flared. You know nothing of liberation, of the chain society puts on. I know everything about freedom, Izuku interrupted, and his voice cut through Redestro's rhetoric like ace through steel. And you don't have it. You think power is freedom? You think force makes people free? He shook his head. That's the thinking of a man who's never tasted real freedom in his life. Redestro's face contorted. The stress in his body spiked, weeks of accumulated pressure converting into raw physical force. He was a bomb waiting to go off, and Izuku's words had just lit the fuse. You dare! Redestro swung, his fist, massive, glowing, trailing streamers of compressed stress energy, came at Izuku like a falling building. The air displaced ahead of it in a shockwave that shattered windows and sent debris flying. Izuku raised ace. The blade went black. The Conqueror's lightning crackled. He met the punch head-on, blade against fist, will against stress, and the collision produced a shockwave that flattened everything within 50 meters. Buildings lost their remaining walls. The plaza's concrete floor cracked in radiating patterns. The sky above them seemed to ripple with the discharged energy. Redestro's fist was bleeding. The Haki-coated edge had bitten into his knuckles, drawn lines of red across that stress-hardened skin, and the villain's eyes went wide with shock and fury. Impossible, Redestro hissed. My stress at this level should be... Should be what? Unbeatable? Izuku pushed forward, driving Redestro's fist back, his grin widening. You're fighting a man who makes the impossible a hobby. He stepped forward and swung ace in an upward arc that caught Redestro across the chest. The Haki-infused blade carved a line from hip to shoulder through the stress armor, and Redestro staggered back, clutching the wound, his aura flickering. The villain roared. His stress reached its absolute maximum, 150%, then 200%, his body expanding further, cracks of light racing across his skin like a shattering window. He became a pillar of force, radiating destruction in waves that tore the plaza apart just by existing. This is the power of liberation. Redestro threw both fists down, and the ground beneath Izuku erupted upward. A stress-charged shockwave that turned the earth itself into a weapon, sending a geyser of concrete and stone rocketing skyward. Izuku leaped. He cleared the eruption, spinning in midair, and looked down at Redestro from above, a hulking, glowing figure of concentrated aggression, burning through his own body to produce more power. This is the technique, Izuku thought, and something ancient inside him recognized the moment. The moment when you found the attack that defined you beyond what you'd been before, he'd used Roger's decree against Overhaul, a single concentrated pillar of will. This was something else, something broader. Something that turned the air itself into an extension of his spirit. Izuku raised ace above his head. The blade gathered every type of Haki simultaneously. Armament hardening its edge, observation attuning it to the flow of energy around it, and Conqueror's Haki flooding outward from the sword in an expanding sphere of black lightning and crimson flame. The air itself turned dark around the blade, light bending, space groaning under the weight of concentrated will. He'd never done this before. It existed in his bones, in his memories, in the whispers of a life lived at the apex of power. A technique for when you needed to erase something from the world. King's Requiem. He swung downward, and the sky split. The attack was a dome, an expanding hemisphere of Conqueror's Haki that erupted from Ace's edge and crashed downward like a judgment from above. It hit Redestro's stress aura and overwhelmed it. The pink glow of the villain's power flickered, dimmed, and shattered under the weight of Izuku's will. because stress was emotion, and Conqueror's Haki dominated all lesser wills, all lesser emotions, all lesser spirits. Redestro's power broke. His stress aura collapsed inward, and without it, his body was just a body, overextended, cracked, burning, and utterly defenseless against the remaining force of Izuku's attack. The king's requiem hit him like the hand of God. Redestro's body cratered into the earth so deep that the impact crater became a bowl 30 meters wide. The shockwave flattened every remaining structure in the plaza and sent soldiers from both sides tumbling off their feet across 3 city blocks. When the dust cleared, Redestro lay at the bottom of the crater, his body shrunken back to normal size, his stress completely drained, his limbs at wrong angles, his eyes staring sightlessly at the sky above. Unconscious, broken, finished. Izuku landed on the crater's rim, ace on his shoulder, barely winded. His uniform was shredded from the exchange, his green hair wild and dusted with debris, but his grin was intact and his eyes burned with that terrible, joyful fire. Freedom, Izuku said to the unconscious villain below, isn't about removing other people's chains. It's about living so fully that the chains stop mattering. The Liberation Army's morale shattered when news of Redestro's defeat spread through their ranks. Soldiers surrendered in waves. Commanders threw down weapons. Within hours, the main force collapsed like a house of cards. The heroes had won. But Izuku knew it was just a prelude. Through his observation haki, even from Deku, he could feel the real threat growing. Somewhere out there, somewhere in the shadows, Tamura Shigaraki was evolving, changing, becoming something that made Redestro look like a footnote. The storm was coming, and it would make everything before it feel like calm seas. The Paranormal Liberation War erupted 4 months later. Intelligence pinpointed Shigaraki's location, a hidden hospital in Jaku City, where the villain was undergoing some form of body modification under the care of a doctor, the heroes later identified as All for One's personal physician. The operation to assault the hospital was launched alongside a simultaneous raid on the Liberation Army's mountain villa, a 2-pronged strike meant to decapitate the threat before it could fully emerge. Izuku's team was assigned to Jaku Hospital. He rode the transport vehicle in silence, which was unusual for him. Ace lay across his knees and his eyes were closed, his observation haki stretching forward across the approaching battlefield, feeling the shape of what awaited them. Uraraka sat beside him, their shoulders touching. Her hand found his in the space between them, a brief squeeze. A silent "I'm here," the communication of two people who had learned to speak without words in the months since that festival bench. Izuku opened his eyes, turned to her. That grin, her grin, the one that was warm and soft and full of a love so vast it humbled him, spread across his face. "After this," he said, low enough that only she could hear, "I'm taking you to the ocean, a real vacation. Sun, sand, and nothing trying to kill us for at least a week." She smiled back, and the warmth of it was enough to light a room. "You say that like you're not going to get bored 3 days in and fight a sea monster." "I would never." He paused. "Unless it started it." She laughed, short, quiet, the kind of laugh that was really just love wearing sound as clothing, and squeezed his hand once more before they both turned back to the approaching battle. Jaku City became hell in under 10 minutes. The hospital raid triggered Shigaraki's premature awakening. The villain burst from his containment pod 75% complete. His body enhanced, his quirks multiplied, his decay evolved to a level that turned anything he touched into spreading disintegration. The wave of gray dust erupted outward from the hospital and consumed everything it touched. Buildings, vehicles, the earth itself dissolving into nothing. Heroes died in the first wave. The decay spread so fast that the evacuation teams barely got civilians clear. City blocks dissolved into dust. The ground itself became unreliable, streets crumbling, buildings sinking into expanding voids. It was an apocalypse centered on a single man, Shigaraki Tamura, freshly born into something beyond human, walking through the collapsing city with his hand outstretched and death following in his wake. Izuku felt it, felt the scale of it, felt the lives winking out through his observation haki. Some heroes, some civilians who hadn't evacuated fast enough, and something in him that was ancient and furious and undeniable surged to the surface. He hit the battlefield like a meteor. Ace was in his hand and black with haki before he cleared the transport vehicle's roof. He launched himself toward the spreading decay, toward the figure at its center, and his Conqueror's Haki pulsed outward in a wave that announced his arrival to every living thing within a mile. In the sky above Jakku City, Endeavor was engaged with a series of high-end Nomu, upgraded, faster, more intelligent than the ones at USJ. He burned through them with pillar after pillar of hellfire, but they kept coming. Below him, the hero teams scattered and reformed, trying to contain the decay wave, trying to save whoever they could. Gigantomachia was coming from the south. Izuku felt the Titan's approach through Observation Haki, a presence so massive it was like sensing an approaching mountain. The League's ultimate enforcer, a being designed to serve all for one with absolute loyalty, was carving a path through the countryside toward Shigaraki's location. When he arrived, the hero's flank would collapse. Someone has to stop the big one. Izuku shouted to the nearest hero team as he sprinted past them. "He's 15 minutes south! We know!" Mount Lady called back, already growing to her maximum size to intercept. "Go! Handle Shigaraki! We'll hold!" Izuku ran. He closed the distance to Shigaraki's position across the crumbling cityscape, leaping over gaps where streets had dissolved, cutting through debris with casual swings of ace, his body a missile aimed at the heart of the destruction. But between him and Shigaraki stood something worse than Nomu, a group of high-end creatures, 6 of them upgraded and evolved with multiple quirks each, formed a wall between Izuku and their master. They were Shigaraki's personal guard, his last line of defense, built to kill anything that got close. Izuku hit them without slowing down. The first lost its head to a horizontal slash so fast the blade was sheathed before the body fell. The second exploded as Izuku drove his Haki-coated fist through its chest cavity and detonated Conqueror's energy inside its torso. The third and fourth came together, one with regeneration, one with hardened skin, and Izuku dealt with them in a single vertical slash, Roger's decree splitting them both from crown to heel in a pillar of focused will. The fifth was fast, genuinely fast. It matched Izuku's speed for 3 exchanges, blows ringing off Haki-coated steel before Izuku caught its rhythm through Observation Haki, found the gap, and removed its upper body from its lower, with a swing that sent both halves tumbling in different directions. The sixth ran. Izuku led it. He was already past the guard line, already closing on Shigaraki, and the villain was waiting for him. Shigaraki stood in the center of a wasteland that had been a hospital. Everything around him for 200 meters was gray dust, dissolved, decayed, erased from existence. He was shirtless, his body covered in new scars and surgical markings, his white hair longer, his red eyes burning with an intelligence and power that hadn't been there at USJ. He looked like a different person. He looked like something All for One had been building for 20 years. "You," Shigaraki said, and his voice had changed too. Deeper, smoother, carrying an ancient weight that didn't belong to a 20-year-old man. "The brat from USJ, the one who killed my first Nomu. And I'll kill whatever else you throw at me," Izuku said, settling into his stance. Ace at his side, body coated in ambient armament haki, his observation reading Shigaraki's enhanced body like an open book. "This ends today, Shigaraki." Shigaraki smiled. It was a horrible thing. Too wide, too knowing, carrying the echo of a man who had lived centuries. "You think you can end what I am?" Shigaraki raised his hand, and the air itself seemed to gray around his fingers, decay reaching out, invisible, hungry. "I am the successor. The vessel, the culmination. You're facing more than just me, boy." Izuku felt it. The shift in Shigaraki's presence, the layering of another consciousness behind those red eyes. All for one. The ancient parasite was there, beneath the surface, pulling strings, whispering, waiting. "Then I'll end you both," Izuku said, and charged. Shigaraki met him. The collision was cataclysmic. Shigaraki moved with a speed and power that rivaled Izuku's own, enhanced by whatever surgical modifications had been done to his body, augmented by multiple quirks working in concert. His fingers swiped at Ace's blade, trying to decay the steel, and Izuku's Armament Haki repelled the touch, but barely. The decay pressed against the Haki coating like acid against glass, sizzling, eroding, testing. Izuku swung. Shigaraki ducked, slid forward, reached for Izuku's torso with all 5 fingers spread. Izuku read it, twisted sideways, brought his knee up into Shigaraki's face. The impact connected with a crack, and Shigaraki's head snapped back, but he was already countering, his hand grabbing at Izuku's leg as it retracted. Izuku retracted faster. He spun away, put 2 meters between them, and reassessed. This wasn't Redestro. This wasn't muscular. This wasn't anyone he'd fought before. Shigaraki was fast, durable, and the decay made every touch a death sentence. "You're strong," Izuku admitted, his grin bloody where Shigaraki's initial rush had caught his lip. "Strongest thing I've fought in this life. And it's going to get worse," Shigaraki said, wiping blood from his broken nose with the back of his hand. "Every second I'm awake, I'm getting stronger. Every second the modifications integrate further. You should have killed me in the hospital. Then I'd better finish this quick." Izuku raised Ace above his head. Conqueror's lightning crackled along the edge. "Divine departure!" The crescent wave of black and red energy screamed toward Shigaraki. The same attack that had split the zero-pointer, that had beaten Todoroki, that had ended countless battles in a single swing. Shigaraki raised both hands and spread his fingers. The decay met the divine departure. For a single, horrifying moment, the flying slash corroded, the energy wave itself dissolving at the edges, gray dust eating into the compressed will like rust consuming iron. Shigaraki's decay was trying to erase the attack itself. The divine departure punched through anyway. Izuku's will was stronger. The core of the attack, the densest part, the truest expression of his spirit, carved through the decay field and slammed into Shigaraki's torso. The impact launched the villain backward, sent him crashing through a pile of rubble, and buried him in debris. Izuku was already in pursuit. He closed the distance before the dust settled. Ace raised for a finishing blow. Shigaraki's hand burst from the rubble and caught the blade. 5 fingers wrapped around the haki-coated steel of Ace, and decay erupted from each fingertip. The Armament Haki held for 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. The blade cracked. A line of gray spread from Shigaraki's fingers across Ace's surface. The decay overwhelming the haki coating at the point of contact, eating into the steel, into the blade Izuku had forged with his own hands, the blade he'd named for a grief older than his own life. Izuku felt it, felt his sword dying. He ripped Ace free from Shigaraki's grip and leaped backward. The blade was damaged, a crack running along its center, gray discoloration marring the steel. It was still functional, but barely. One more touch of that decay, and it would crumble. Shigaraki rose from the rubble, smiling that horrible smile, and his body was regenerating. The wound from divine departure closing, healing, the flesh knitting itself back together with an efficiency that spoke of multiple healing quirks operating simultaneously. "You can't win," Shigaraki said. "I'll outlast you. I'll decay everything you throw at me. I'll regenerate everything you land, and eventually," he spread his arms, "eventually, even your will breaks." Izuku looked at the crack in Ace's blade, at the villain regenerating before his eyes. At the spreading wasteland of decay that surrounded them in every direction, he laughed. That laugh, booming, wild, genuine, insane, erupted from him in a wave of sound that made Shigaraki's smile flicker with uncertainty. Izuku threw his head back and laughed at the sky, at the rubble, at the end of the world unfolding around him, and it was the purest expression of who he was. "Break my will?" Izuku said, bringing his eyes back to Shigaraki, and they were burning. Green fire, ancient light, the gaze of a man who had stood at the peak of a world and laughed at his own execution. "You don't have enough centuries for that." He sheathed the damaged ace. The cracked blade slid home with a whisper of steel. Then Izuku raised his bare fists. Armament Haki coated them, blacker than black, denser than he'd ever managed, compressed into gauntlets of pure will that made the air scream around his knuckles. The Conqueror's lightning arced between his fingers, building, intensifying until his fists were wreathed in an aura of destruction that rivaled Shigaraki's own. "Round 2, Izuku said. "No sword, just me." Shigaraki lunged. Izuku met him blow for blow. Fist against palm, speed against decay, will against annihilation. They moved so fast that the watchers, the heroes who had cleared the perimeter, the cameras still broadcasting from drones above, saw only blurs and shockwaves and the continuous crack of impacts that split the air. Izuku's Observation Haki sang. Every swipe of Shigaraki's decaying hands was dodged by millimeters, so close that the gray aura kissed his skin but never connected. He wove through the villain's attacks like smoke through fingers, and every opening he found, his fists filled. Right cross to the jaw, haki detonating on impact, Shigaraki's head snapping sideways, left hook to the ribs, another crack of bones breaking under the force of concentrated will, a knee to the solar plexus that doubled the villain forward, followed by an elbow to the base of the skull that drove him face first into the ground. Shigaraki regenerated, rose, attacked again. Izuku beat him down again, and again, and again. 7 times, Shigaraki rose. 7 times, Izuku put him back in the dirt, each time more brutally than the last. Each time with less patience and more fury, his fists leaving deeper marks, breaking more bones, driving the message deeper. You cannot beat me. You will never beat me. I am the wall you don't get past. After the 7th time, Shigaraki didn't immediately rise. He lay in the crater Izuku's last punch had created, his body a wreck of broken bones and regenerating tissue, his red eyes staring at the sky while his healing struggled to keep up with the damage. And behind those eyes, something stirred, something ancient and opportunistic that had been watching, waiting for this moment. Enough, said a voice from Shigaraki's mouth that wasn't Shigaraki's. The air changed. All for One emerged. The ancient villain's consciousness surged forward, displacing Shigaraki's will, seizing control of the body with the ease of a man stepping into a suit he'd had tailored. Shigaraki's face went slack, then reformed. Features shifting subtly, the posture changing, the very aura of the body altering, until it was less a young man and more a vessel-wearing youth as a mask. Impressive, boy, All for One said through Shigaraki's mouth, and the voice was different now, that same silk over steel from Kamino, that same ancient measured condescension. You've grown since our last meeting, but this body, this vessel. Shigaraki's form rose, bones snapping back into place, flesh regenerating at double speed, power flooding every cell as All for One brought his full accumulated strength to bear. This was always my true weapon. Izuku watched the transformation with steady eyes. His grin stayed. His haki stayed. There you are, Izuku said. I was wondering when you'd stop hiding behind the puppet. All for One smiled with Shigaraki's face. I wonder, do you feel fear? Even now, even facing the accumulation of centuries? I've never felt fear in my life, Izuku said, and it was the simple truth. And I'm going to tell you something, old man. Something important, something I want you to carry with you to whatever hell you're about to visit. He settled into his stance, fists raised, haki blazing. You want to control everything. You want to own people. You want to be the one at the top, holding the strings, keeping everyone beneath you. Izuku's grin sharpened, and the Conqueror's haki rolled off him in waves that cracked the ground at his feet. But let me tell you something about real treasure. The fused villain raised an eyebrow. The real treasure in this world isn't power. It isn't control. It isn't living forever in someone else's body. Izuku's eyes blazed with that ancient fire, the fire of a man who had stood at Laugh Tale and understood the true nature of the world's greatest secret. The real treasure is the lives of the people you love, the freedom to stand with them, the fire you pass on, and you miserable, grasping, hollow thing, you've spent centuries stealing from others because you've got nothing of your own worth protecting. All for One's expression darkened. That's why you'll lose, Izuku said. Today. Here, to me, because I fight for everyone behind me, and you fight for nothing but yourself. Touching, All for One said, and raised Shigaraki's hand. But sentiment doesn't win wars. Every stolen quirk in Shigaraki's body activated simultaneously. A combination attack, air cannons, telekinesis, raw force multiplication, decay spreading through the atmosphere itself, erupted toward Izuku in a wave of absolute annihilation. The air turned gray. The ground dissolved. Even light seemed to die in the path of that attack. Izuku planted his feet. He pulled everything he had into his fists. Every lesson, every battle, every lifetime of experience, every ounce of Conqueror's Haki and Armament Haki and Observation Haki operating at their absolute pinnacle. His body went beyond black. The Haki coating extended outward, not just covering his skin, but projecting from it, forming an aura of raw will that wrapped around his fists like the gauntlets of a war god. He could feel them behind him. Through his Observation Haki, he felt his crew, Uraraka, fighting on the western flank, her heart beating steady and sure. Todoroki, holding the line against Nomu with fire and ice unleashed in equal measure. Ida, evacuating civilians at speeds that pushed his engines to their limits. Kirishima, unbreakable and laughing, holding a position that 3 pro-heroes had abandoned. Bakugo, screaming and exploding and fighting with everything he had, because somewhere along the way, he'd stopped fighting against Izuku and started fighting beside him. Eri, small and safe, evacuated to the rear lines, her heart a steady candle in the storm of the battlefield, all might. Watching from a monitor room somewhere, powerless now, his fists clenched, his eyes locked on the screen, showing his successor in spirit, if never in power. All of them. His crew, his treasure, his reason. "I'm going to tell you what a great man said at the end of his life," Izuku said, and his voice carried across the wasteland with the force of a cannon, with the weight of a world, with the authority of a king delivering his final judgment. "My treasure?" Izuku raised his fist. "You want my treasure? I'll give it to you. I left everything this world has to offer in the people who will carry it forward after me. The will to be free, the dream of a world without chains. Go find it. I left it all, right here." He punched his own chest with his free hand, once hard over his heart, and grinned so wide it split his face in half. Then he turned that grin on All for One, on the wave of annihilation bearing down on him, and cocked back his right fist. King's Requiem. Final movement. He threw the punch. It wasn't a slash. It wasn't a wave. It was his fist. Just his fist. One 16-year-old boy's clenched hand, coated in so much haki that reality couldn't contain it. The Conqueror's lightning erupted in all directions. The armament coating extended from his knuckles in a blast cone of compressed will. His Observation Haki guided the trajectory with the precision of a master navigator reading the stars. The punch met All for One's combined attack and erased it. The decay wave dissolved. The air cannons collapsed. The telekinetic force shattered. Every component of that ancient villain's arsenal broke apart under the weight of a single focused blow. Because Conqueror's Haki at its apex wasn't a physical force. It was the assertion of one soul's supremacy over another. And Izuku Midoriya's soul was the soul of the Pirate King, the greatest will the ocean had ever known, reborn into a world that had never seen its like. The punch continued through the destroyed attack and hit the fused villain in the chest. The impact was absolute. All for One's stolen quirks shattered. One by one, like windows breaking in sequence, every accumulated power in that body fractured under the force of a will that refused to acknowledge their existence. The healing quirk failed first, broken by the Haki's dominance, rendered meaningless against a force that operated beyond the physical. The strength enhancements followed, the speed, the durability, decay, all of them broke. What remained was a man, just a man, mortal and bleeding and crumbling, standing in the center of a wasteland with nothing left. Shigaraki's body collapsed inward as the stolen powers fled it, and All for One's consciousness screamed through those red eyes as everything he'd built over centuries fell apart under the weight of a single punch from a boy who refused to be afraid. Izuku stepped forward. One step. 2. He looked down at the crumpled form of the greatest villain in history, the man who had broken All Might, created the League, orchestrated decades of suffering, stolen lives and powers and futures, and his face held neither mercy nor cruelty, just certainty. "This is your end," Izuku said. "You lived too long, you stole too much, and you never once used any of it for anyone but yourself." All for One looked up at him through failing eyes. "You? What are you?" Izuku's grin was the last thing the ancient villain ever saw. "I'm the man who will never die." He brought his haki-coated fist down. The final blow hit the fused villain's skull with the concentrated force of every battle Izuku had ever fought, every loss his soul had ever carried, every promise he'd ever made to the people behind him. It drove All for One's consciousness into oblivion. It snuffed out Tomura Shigaraki's decayed existence like a candle in a hurricane. It ended, permanently and irrevocably. The greatest evil Japan had ever known. There was no redemption arc. There was no last-second hesitation. There was no villain monologue buying time for a resurrection. There was only Izuku's fist, and then there was nothing. The body beneath him was still, utterly, finally, permanently still. The decay aura faded. The stolen quirks dissipated into the atmosphere like smoke. The red eyes closed and did not open again. Izuku stood up. Around him. The wasteland of Jakku City stretched in every direction, gray dust and rubble and the echoes of a battle that had redrawn the map. In the distance, he could hear fighting still. The remnants of the Liberation Army, the last Nomu, the soldiers who hadn't surrendered yet. But the core was gone. The head was severed. The threat that had haunted Hero Society for generations was ended. Izuku raised his face to the sky. It was blue. The clouds from the morning had blown away and afternoon sunlight poured down on the devastation like a promise. The same sky he'd always loved. The same sky that called to him with the memory of an ocean he'd once sailed and would sail again in whatever came after this life. He laughed. The laugh erupted from him, enormous, wild, free, echoing across the wasteland and the city beyond it. It carried no triumph, no arrogance, no victory celebration. It was pure joy. The joy of being alive. The joy of standing in sunlight with your crew safe behind you and the world still spinning. The joy of a man who had won the impossible battle and knew, in his bones, that this was exactly what he was born for. The cameras caught it. The drones above, still broadcasting, captured the image that would become the defining photograph of the new era. A 16-year-old boy standing alone in a wasteland, face raised to the sky, laughing with everything he had while sunlight poured over him like liquid gold. The heroes arrived in waves after that. Pro-heroes clearing rubble, medical teams treating the wounded, police coordinating the mass arrests of surrendering liberation soldiers. Endeavor landed beside Izuku 20 minutes later, his flames dimming, his face marked with a complexity that was rare for the number 2 hero. "Is it done?" Endeavor asked. "It's done." Izuku's voice was easy, relaxed, like he just finished a long swim rather than ended a war. All for One is gone. Shigaraki is gone. Whatever else is left is cleanup. Endeavor looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in his career, the flame hero bowed his head to a child. "Thank you," Endeavor said, and the words sounded like they cost him everything. Izuku clapped him on the shoulder. "Go find your son. He fought like a demon today. Tell him you're proud." Endeavor's eyes widened. Then something shifted in his face. Something old and calcified cracking, letting in light. He turned and walked away without another word, toward the western front, where Todoroki's signal burned bright in Izuku's Observation Haki. Uraraka found him an hour later. She came running through the rubble, filthy, bruised, her costume torn, dried blood from a cut on her forehead marking a line across her face. And she was the most beautiful thing Izuku had ever seen. She ran straight into him, hit his chest at full speed, and wrapped her arms around him so tight he felt his battered ribs protest. "You're alive," she said into his shirt, and her voice was breaking. "Always." He held her. His chin rested on her hair, his arms encircling her completely, and the world could have ended again around them and he wouldn't have moved. "Always alive. For you." She pulled back enough to look at his face, at the cuts, the bruises, the blood in his hair and on his knuckles, and her eyes were wet, but her smile was fierce. "You did it," she said. "We did it." He kissed her forehead. "All of us. The whole crew." She kissed him properly, hard and desperate and full of the relief that came from nearly losing something and then finding it still whole in your hands, and he kissed her back with everything he had. Kirishima found them like that and started cheering. Ida arrived 2 minutes later and tried to give a speech about public decorum before his voice cracked, and he hugged them both. Todoroki appeared, burns on his left side, frost on his right, his mismatched eyes alive with exhaustion and something close to peace, and nodded at Izuku with the faintest ghost of a smile. Bakugo came last. He stood 10 feet away, his gauntlets cracked and smoking, his face covered in soot and fury and something else, something he'd spent years refusing to name. He stared at Izuku, who stood in the center of his friends with his arm around Uraraka and his grin aimed at the sky. "Oi," Bakugo said. His voice was rough, raw. "Midoriya." Izuku looked at him. "Yeah?" Bakugo's jaw worked, his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. The words fought against everything he'd ever been, every ounce of pride, every year of refusal, every layer of rage that had defined him since childhood. "Good fight," Bakugo said. 2 words. They came out like he was spitting glass. Izuku's grin widened. "Welcome to the crew, Katsuki. Don't push it." But he didn't walk away. He stayed. 10 feet from the group, arms crossed, scowling but present. And that was enough. That was more than enough. The aftermath of the Paranormal Liberation War reshaped Japan. Hero society rebuilt itself from the ground up. New regulations, new training paradigms, new partnerships between heroes and communities that hadn't existed before. The era of a single symbol of peace was over. In its place grew something broader, something distributed, something that didn't rest on one man's shoulders. Izuku graduated UA 2 years later at the top of his class with the highest combat rating ever recorded and a rescue score that made Recovery Girl cry. He opened his own agency within the year, Crew Hero Agency, because of course he did, and staffed it with the people he loved. Uraraka was his partner, in the agency, in the field, in every way that mattered. They moved in together on a day that started with Izuku carrying her across the threshold of their apartment and ended with them arguing about who got the bigger closet. She won. Their partnership in hero work was seamless. Her gravity control complementing his combat dominance, her precision complementing his overwhelming force, her warmth complementing his wildfire. Todoroki joined the agency a year after it opened. So did Kirishima. Ida ran his own agency but coordinated with Izuku's, so often they were functionally one organization. Even Bakugo, who swore he'd never work under Izuku's name, somehow ended up responding to joint operations more often than coincidence could explain. Eri grew up in their orbit. She spent weekends at Izuku and Uraraka's apartment, eating homemade curry and watching action movies and learning to laugh without bracing for pain afterward. She called Izuku Big Brother. She called Uraraka Big Sister. On her 8th birthday, Izuku gave her a tiny necklace with a sun pendant and told her it represented the light she'd brought into his life. She wore it every day. Ace got reforged. Izuku took the damaged blade to a master swordsmith, a woman named Hatsume, who specialized in hero equipment and owed Izuku a favor from the war and had the cracked steel reborn. The new Ace was stronger. The smith had folded the steel with Izuku's own haki, had somehow bonded the metal to his will at a molecular level, creating a blade that turned black the instant his hand touched the grip without conscious activation. "This sword will never break again," Hatsume told him, handing it over. Izuku drew the blade and felt it sing in his hand. The same weight, the same balance, the same grief and love and promise that he'd poured into it years ago in a rented workshop, but stronger now, tempered by everything they'd survived. "Thanks," Izuku said, sheathing it. "She's perfect." The years were good. They fought villains, because villains never stopped entirely, because the world always needed people willing to stand between the innocent and the cruel. But the apocalyptic threats were done. The power vacuum left by All for One's death, and the Liberation Army's collapse gradually filled with smaller conflicts, manageable crises, the normal churn of a world rebuilding. Izuku handled them all with the same energy he'd always had. The same laugh, the same grin, the same absolute refusal to let fear dictate a single decision. He became the #1 hero within 3 years of graduating, a ranking that surprised absolutely nobody who had ever met him. The public loved him. The media loved him. Children grew up wanting to be like him, carrying toy swords and grinning too wide. He never lost that fire, never got bored, never stopped treating every day like the greatest adventure anyone had ever been invited on. He took cases that made other heroes flinch, laughed at threats that made agencies evacuate, and treated the work of saving people with the same joy he'd brought to it since he was 4 years old. On a Tuesday evening, 5 years after the war, Izuku sat on the roof of his agency building, Ace across his knees, watching the sun set over an ocean he could see from this particular spot in the city. The water caught the light and turned gold, and something in his chest hummed with a recognition so deep it transcended language. Uraraka found him there. She always found him there, on evenings like this, the evenings when the light hit the water right and his eyes went distant, seeing something beyond the horizon. She sat beside him, said nothing, just leaned her weight against his side and breathed. "You know," Izuku said after a long while, his voice warm and low, "in another life, I think I sailed that ocean, all of it, every island, every storm." He looked at her and his grin was soft in a way reserved only for her. "But I think I like this life better. Because you have better company?" she guessed, smiling. "Because I have you." He kissed her temple. "And the crew, and Eri, and every person I've gotten to save. He looked back at the ocean and his eyes sparkled with that ancient light, the light of the Pirate King, still burning, never dimming. The other life was about the journey. This life is about the people. That's the same thing for you, Uraraka said, because she knew him better than anyone alive. He laughed. That laugh, wild, free, echoing across the rooftop and over the city like a promise to anyone listening that the world was still worth loving. Yeah, Izuku Midoriya said, the greatest hero who ever lived, the boy who was born laughing and would die laughing, the soul of the Pirate King reborn into a world that needed him. Yeah, it is. The sun touched the water, the sky blazed gold, and somewhere in the depths of his soul, the voice that had guided him since he was 4 years old, the voice of the sea, the voice of adventure, the voice of the man who died, smiling and chose to live again, whispered one final truth. You found it. The one piece was always this: the people you love, the life you chose, the freedom you earned. Well done, kid. Izuku grinned at the horizon, pulled Uraraka closer, and watched the sun disappear beneath the edge of the world. Free.
The hero roster. A massive salute to the legends backing this journey. Your support is what keeps the momentum at an all-time high and the dream moving forward. You guys are the absolute best. Pro heroes. The elite front line, stepping up and setting the pace for the whole community. DA, Fire 05.
Symbol of peace. The pillars of the community. The titans who keep our foundations solid and the hype at an all-time high. Alexander Igarza. That guy Miso. Deck. Lydell Scott Jr., James Martin, Victor Laroux, Rune Brokstad, Ariuse Bryant, Jonah Wheeler, T-Mac, XXHJRX3A7XX, Hyperbeams, Michael Murphy, Grand Region Kell, Sin Hunter, Logan Bland, Alexander Johannes, Alex Morgan, Ray Various, That Other Guy Too, Chad Reynolds, T. Mackie 68 Rimuru, A. Zetros, Dweller of the Deepest Depths, Lone Wolf, Jacob Ropes, Bully Maguire Shadow, Rathakit Thitiratnan Fakul, Neostar Productions, Asael Cardenas, Shaquan Simmons, Thunder, Sunawin 631, Elijah Saunders, Peter Hamilton, Freddie Rose, Omega, Akuma Noakami, Remorsefuls, Black Vein, Joshua Hedrington, Aaron Abercrombie, Drift SK8ER, Corey Tokars, Jan, Devin Black, Crow, Joe Bros, Ray Von Crimson River, Dante Alastor, Adam Yonkers, Blood Saints, Donna Cafe, Zeph, KC, Howie 60, Ignacio. Hope of the universe, the ultimate guardians, celestial tier supporters whose impact literally shines across the galaxy. Void Rot, Chaos Umbre, Noroi Uzumaki Uchiha, Tyshawn Palmer, Coldbane 4, The Maniac 563, Debs, LS Morningstar, Marl, Spintown, I Shoot X50, Greg Green, James, Q Hon Yen Thompson, Juan, and Zeno KJ. There you have it, the full insane ride of Deku as Roger's reincarnation. If you loved the Haki chaos, the crew vibes, and that unbreakable grin, smash like, subscribe for more wild crossovers, and drop your favorite moment in the comments. Thanks for watching, Legends. Stay free.